What? Has Sun Xiang's one-leaf autumn been suppressed? What kind of hand speed is this and what kind of operational skills is it? Chu Xingmo, you big scammer. I am wrongly accused. I just have quick hands and good eyes. Who knew that guy was so careless? Chu Xingmo spread out his hand and said helplessly. Is it so difficult to be honest these days? He really didn't pretend to be beat. Keywords of the novel. The strongest scattered person among full-time experts without pop-ups, the strongest scattered person among full-time experts. Download the complete set of TXT, and read the latest chapters of The Strongest Scattered Person Among Full-time Experts. Chapter 1. Young Chu Xingmo. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 1. Young Chu Xingmo. Summer noon is scorching and quiet, with the scorching sun tirelessly pouring heat onto the earth. The temperature enough to steam eggs makes all the villagers of Fu's village stay at home, even the most hard-working farmers dare not come down to work at this time. And by the pond behind the village, a young figure sat quietly, like an old monk meditating. The young man was naked on his upper body, wearing a pair of silver-gray casual pants, with a pair of ordinary black high-top canvas shoes under his feet. Beads of sweat, the size of beans, rolled down his delicate cheeks and slid down his bare upper body in a somewhat dangerous curve. His bare chest undulated slowly with his breathing, and the sharp 8-pack abdominal muscles were not the physique he could have at his age. The swollen muscles did not appear to give his slightly emaciated body a feeling of bamboo-like joints. A pale red dragonfly flew over and circled around the young man, seemingly trying to determine if the human in front of it was a stone statue. In the end, the dragonfly seemed to have lost interest and flew to the lotus tip in the pond, humming and folding its wings. Suddenly, there was a rapid sound of breaking the wind in mid-air, and a rotating stone hit the boy's back fiercely from behind. Ah! Wow! The boy's body, sitting cross-legged, slammed fiercely into the pond, splashing a pool of water. The red dragonfly, which was originally resting on the lotus tip, was also startled and flew away with its wings trembling. Lazy again. A voice full of vitality came from the shore, with a tone of dissatisfaction. The young man leaned out of the pond, wiped his face hard, and smiled awkwardly. Master. The old man in a white robe standing on the shore gently stroked his graying beard and gave him a bad glance. Let me ask you to sit still, pour yourself down, you can even fall asleep while sitting. Although the old man said so, there was not much real anger on his face. Obviously, this was just a serious reprimand from the elders when they found out that the younger generation was slacking off. Hee. As he got up from the pond, the boy scratched his head and smiled awkwardly, without arguing for himself. All right, come and eat. The old man shook his head helplessly and didn't say much, just waving to signal the boy to follow. Here we go. He grabbed the clothes lying on the shore and, disregarding his still wet body, hurriedly put them on and followed the figure of the old man who had left. In the bamboo pavilion not far from the pond, a clean dining cloth was spread on the stone table with a sense of age, on which 2 dishes of ordinary farm dishes were placed. The steaming bamboo baskets were put aside, and there were several full and round mantou inside. Placing the peeled egg in front of the old man, the young man turned his head and smiled sincerely at the middle-aged woman standing aside. Aunt Li, thank you today. Oh, by the way. Aunt Li quickly waved her hand, her plump cheeks filled with a look of anger. Look at this child, what do you say, thank you or not? Isn't this what the village has been doing for the past decade or so? You're right, Master Chen. Chen Huayang smiled and nodded. Aunt Li, if you don't mind, let's eat here. No need, no need. Aunt Li waved her hand, I'll go back first. There's still work in the field for a while. Xingmo, Chen Dao Chang, you guys should eat. Chu Xingmo looked at Aunt Li's departing figure, smiled lightly and shook his head, then took out an egg from the frame and peeled it for himself. Master, is it appropriate to keep bothering everyone in the village like this? Chu Xingmo said as he put the peeled egg into his mouth. Can't you wait for me to go back and cook? Although he grew up eating 100 meals since his mother passed away, and everyone in the village treated his own children kindly, as he grew older, he began to feel a bit embarrassed about this troublesome behavior and learned to cook for himself. Even as a cheap master, he didn't feel any shame about such things. What do you know? Chen Huayang sneered at him with a disdainful glance at the small dish. This is called each taking what they need. I helped them on a regular basis, but they spontaneously said they would cook for me and exchange it for an equivalent amount. Chu Xingmo couldn't bear to look straight at the beginning and said, just pretend to give someone a fortune-telling or feng shui, and ask them to cook. Master, you're really good. He didn't dare to say the rest. He knows his master's urinary habits better than anyone else. If he said this, he wouldn't want to eat today's meal. Chen Huayang naturally heard Chu Xingmo's sarcastic words and reached out to pat him hard on the head. What do you mean, stinky kid? Did you talk like that? Your master, I'm that kind of person. Chu Xingmo was eating now. He almost spewed the mantu out of his mouth when he slapped him rudely. He quickly waved his hand to forgive him. Shifu, I was wrong. I was joking just now. Of course you're not that kind of person. That's pretty much the same. Chen Huayang nodded slightly and let him go. Finally finishing the meal peacefully, Chu Xingmo put the plate into the bamboo basket and said to Chen Huayang, who was sitting there leisurely drinking tea, Master, I plan to go outside and find some work to do in a while. You can stay in the village with peace of mind when you're old, and wait for the disciples to earn money to come back and show filial piety to you. At the age of 17, he did not choose to take the college entrance examination. Instead, he decided to go out and explore after finishing his sophomore year. Although he could have chosen to study at a higher university with his abilities, after careful consideration, he ultimately gave up on this idea. On the one hand, he has no money. Although these villagers who regard him as their own will definitely try their best to raise money for him if they tell everyone in the village, Chu Xingmo is really embarrassed to trouble the villagers. Although their village is called Fu's village, it is a well-known poverty-stricken village far and wide. Although they can have enough to eat, each family is not very wealthy to be honest. Moreover, in recent years, if it were not for the village's support, he might not even be able to attend high school. This makes him have the face to speak out. Another reason was that he couldn't rest assured of his master. Despite the fact that their mother had passed away, Chen Huayang had raised him on his own. Their relationship had long been with their family, and although Chen Huayang appeared to be only in his 50s, he knew that Chen was just looking young on the surface. The old man's actual age was already over 90 years old, leaving him here alone. Even with the care of the villagers, Chu Xingmo still felt uneasy. Oh, Chen Huayang was stunned. He put down the teacup in his hand and let out a light sigh, then looked up at Chu Xingmo with a fixed gaze. Oh, master, why are you looking at me like that? Chu Xingmo stopped his hand and said, feeling a little flustered by Chen Huayang's gaze. It's nothing, just a bit dazed. Chen Huayang shook his head, his eyes filled with relief. In the blink of an eye, you're already so big. Time flies so fast. When he first started taking care of Chu Xingmo, he was only 4 or 5 years old, about the same height as the stone table in front of him. But now he has grown into a man who can handle things on his own. Master. Chu Xing sat down silently, looking at Chen Huayang with a sad expression. He knew that master was reluctant to part with him. Who can be ruthless, not to mention being a master and disciple who have been together day and night for over a decade. Over the years, Chen Huayang has taken care of his life, taught him martial arts, and spent thousands of days and nights together. Chu Xingmo has already regarded him as his closest relative, and now that he wants to leave him, Chu Xingmo is also quite reluctant. It's okay. Chen Huayang waved his hand and looked relieved. The child has grown up and should go out and explore. You can go ahead. Chu Xingmo focused his head and raised his hand to wipe away the tears that were about to overflow from his eyes. As Chu Xingmo slowly walked away, Chen Huayang's old face showed a pleased smile, and a glimmer of crystal shone in his eyes. Mom. Chu Xingmo returned home and gazed affectionately at the photos placed on the table, with tears in his eyes. I will definitely find him. The woman in the black and white photo is dressed in simple clothes, neatly arranged with soft green silk draped over her head. She looks at Chu Xingmo with a smile on her face. Although it is just a photo with a sense of time, it still shows how bright and charming the woman was when she was young. Chu Xingmo's impression of his mother is actually very vague. The only thing he remembers is the gentle smile on his mother's face when she took care of him when he was young, as well as the gray-white hair that could be faintly seen in her soft green hair. Suppressing the rolling thoughts in his mind, Chu Xingmo lay on the bed and slowly fell asleep. In his sleep, he seemed to see his mother's smiling face again. Don't give it away, everyone. Chu Xingmo smiled at the villagers behind him with his backpack on his back and said, let's all go back quickly. Although he had a smile on his face, it seemed somewhat forced and sad no matter how he looked. Seeing his smile, which was even more unsightly than crying, many villagers secretly wiped away their tears. In recent years, almost everyone in Fu's village has watched Chu Xingmo grow up. In everyone's hearts, Chu Xingmo is like their own child. Now that the child is leaving, how can these simple-hearted villagers not be sad? All right, let's all disperse. Chen Huayang's voice came from behind the crowd, and the villagers immediately separated a road for the latter to come over. Master, Chu Xingmo wiped away his tears and lifted his head and called out softly. I didn't see Chen Huayang's figure just now. Chu Xingmo thought that his master, who wanted to save face, was afraid to see him cry and feel sad, so he didn't have the courage to come and see him off. He felt a bit regretful in his heart. Chen Huayang nodded calmly, his expression not as sad as the villagers around him. He just reached out his right hand and handed the object in his palm to Chu Xingmo. Ding Ding glanced at the object in Chen Huayang's palm. It was a jade pendant with a rich color, different from the shoddy counterfeit products sold outside. Chen Huayang's jade pendant looked very high quality, with a pair of lifelike dragon and phoenix patterns carved on it, shining brightly in the sunlight. This is what your mother once wore. Chu Xingmo looked at Chen Huayang in disbelief and murmured, my mother. That's right. Chen Huayang nodded and hung the jade pendant around Chu Xingmo's neck. When your mother gave me this jade pendant back then, she entrusted me to find a suitable time to give it to you. Now that you're leaving, I'm afraid there's no more suitable time than this. Mom, didn't she say anything? Chu Xingmo couldn't help but ask as he looked down at the jade pendant around his neck. She only said it's related to your father. Is that right? Chu Xingmo's face remained unchanged as he put the jade pendant inside his clothes, and then smiled. I won't say thank you to you, it's too outrageous. You stinky kid. Chen Huayang laughed and cursed, and the villagers beside him couldn't help but show a joyful smile. The thought of parting was dispelled by this sudden incident, and everyone looked at Chu Xingmo with a sad expression gradually converging. Coincidentally, the long-distance bus that Chu Xingmo was waiting for arrived. Chen Huayang took 2 steps forward and leaned on Chu Xingmo's shoulder, staring into his eyes. He said seriously, Xingmo, if you're really tired outside, come back. Don't forget, this will always be your home. Chu Xingmo was stunned, his gaze swept over the villagers who were all looking at him with reluctance. His nose became sore, and the tears he had just held back had a tendency to fall again. Chu Xingmo focused his head and was immediately turned around by his backpack to get on the bus. He was afraid that if he stayed for an extra second, the tears in his eyes would drown him. At that time, he really couldn't bear to leave. The bus quickly started, and the villagers looked at the slowly starting car and shouted loudly. Xingmo, one should take good care of oneself. Don't forget to come back often and take a look. Remember to add clothes when it's cold. Take care. The plain words contained infinite emotions and instructions, and the tears in Chu Xingmo's eyes could no longer be suppressed. Tears rolled down his delicate cheeks. Fortunately, he and the driver were the only two on the long-distance bus at this moment, and he didn't have to worry about anything. He could cry bitterly and happily. Everyone, take care of yourself. I will take good care of myself. Leaving his head out of the car window, Chu Xingmo waved to the villagers who had gradually drifted away and shouted loudly. Foolish disciple. Chen Huang smiled and looked at the scene before him, his eyes full of anticipation. Go ahead. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Honor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Honor, How Difficult. In an internet cafe in H City, Chu Xingmo sat in his seat, clutching his hair and looking at rows of job advertisements on the computer page in front of him with a headache. He has been in H City for almost 3 days now, standing on the train for 2 full days, and almost had weak legs when he got off. In order to avoid the tragic situation of having to spend all the money he had on him and going to the west to drink, Chu Xingmo got out of the car and started looking for work everywhere without taking a break. His requirements were not high either. He just managed to give him some money every day, which should have made it easy to find work, but he overlooked the most serious issue. His age. At first, he didn't know if he had the courage to run to the job market for a few rounds, but those security guards saw his ID card and didn't even let him in. Sorry, entry is not allowed here under the age of 18. Please understand. Okay. They have such a rule, and Chu Xingmo has nothing to say. But understanding comes from understanding, and he couldn't help but feel a bit resentful in his heart. What's wrong with being young? Have you ever heard of your aspirations in your youth? He is young, but his technical ability is definitely not inferior. When he was in school, his math and physics grades were once among the top 3 in the school rankings. Is this a big city? Chu Xingmo sighed and picked up his backpack before leaving the talent market. Later on, he also looked for several roadside shops or restaurants, but when those bosses saw Chu Xingmo's ID card, they all shook their heads and politely refused him. Although Chu Xingmo's age is only less than 2 months away from 18, underage is considered underage. In H City, where various social systems are quite well established, hiring child labor is a serious punishment, and these bosses certainly dare not hire him. After a day of encountering obstacles everywhere, Chu Xingmo, exhausted both physically and mentally, found this internet cafe. The owner of the cafe was a good person and hesitated after seeing his documents. However, he noticed Chu Xingmo carrying a bag and looking exhausted, so he managed to get a machine for him to rest well. For many backpackers wandering around, internet cafes are actually a more suitable place to rest than budget hotels. It goes without saying that even the most expensive internet cafes only cost around 30 yuan for a night, and their computers and internet are not even as strong as budget hotels. Therefore, for many people who wander around without a fixed place to live, internet cafes have become their common night destination. Chu Xingmo was really tired. After starting the machine, he didn't even turn it on. He hugged his backpack in his arms, leaned back in the chair, and fell asleep. As a result, he felt sore all over the next day. People who have slept in internet cafes should have a deep understanding. Sleeping in internet cafes is indeed cheap, but sitting in a chair and sleeping all night will definitely make you feel uncomfortable in the morning. After all, maintaining a sitting position for a long time will inevitably result in poor blood circulation and stiff limbs, which is certain. Fortunately, Chu Xingmo has undergone abnormal level cultivation by Chen Huayang since childhood, and his physical fitness is much better than that of ordinary people. After washing his face in the bathroom, he quickly recovered. Having bought 2 steamed buns as breakfast at the steamed bun shop downstairs, Chu Xingmo began searching for job advertisements online. 2 of them confirmed his talent and chatted with him for a while. However, when they heard that Chu Xingmo was not yet 18 years old, they all expressed regret and asked him to wait for 2 months, but Chu Xingmo didn't have so much time. Saving money on his body will enable him to sustain himself for more than half a month, 2 months. I'm afraid his ashes should be raised. After arriving in H City, Chu Xingmo realized how difficult it is to live alone in a big city. Without a stable source of income, one cannot survive in this city with huge daily expenses. This is a bit different from the script he initially thought of. He even suspects that since he left Fu's village, his life has been changed from easy difficulty to hard difficulty. For him, as a novice in society, it's like playing his music to death. Why, haven't you found a job yet? A can of cola was placed on the table in front of him. Chu Xingmo turned his head and saw Tao Xian, the owner of Jiashi Internet Cafe, smiling as he gazed at him. Brother Xian, Chu Xingmo greeted Tao Xian and leaned back in his chair, nodding with a bitter smile. Pulling aside the chair next to Chu Xingmo, he sat down and stared at the other person's computer screen for a while. Tao Xian said, "Your age is a hard injury. According to the regulations above, no one dares to use you." What else can Chu Xingmo say? He has a deep understanding of what Tao Xian has said in the past few days. Why don't you come to my place as an internet administrator? After pondering for a moment, Tao Xian suddenly spoke up. Chu Xingmo's body, leaning against the back of the chair, bounced up like an electric shock and looked at Tao Xian in astonishment. Brother Xian, you're not joking, are you? The salary may be a bit low, but it's not a problem to cover up. Tao Xian smiled, his expression not half joking. Chu Xingmo's eyes lit up, but quickly dimmed. Tao Xian was a good person, and there was absolutely no element of humiliation in mentioning this. However, it was precisely because of this that Chu Xingmo could not let the other party get into trouble for his own reasons. Taking in minors online and recruiting minors for work are 2 completely different concepts. A few days ago, when the police came to inspect, Tao Xian could say that he was his nephew evading him. Even if he was found out, it was just criticism and education. However, once he was discovered as an internet administrator here, the nature of the situation would be completely different. At the very least, he shouldn't want to continue opening this internet cafe. Thank you, Brother Xian, but I don't want to cause you any big trouble because of my reasons, Chu Xingmo said seriously. Over the years, he has been very averse to troubling others. The villagers who have taken care of him for over a decade are unwilling to go through too much trouble, let alone Tao Xian, a stranger he just met. Okay, Tao Xian nodded without further persuading Chu Xingmo, but added in the end, you don't have to worry about those issues. I naturally have a solution, and you're just staying here for 2 months. You can look for a new job when you're old. Tao Xian's words were genuine, and Chu Xingmo's heart surged with emotion. The 2 had only known each other for a few days, but the other was so considerate of him, which left him unsure of what to say for a moment. Okay, if you keep looking, I won't disturb you anymore. He patted Chu Xingmo's shoulder and Tao Xian stood up and left. Okay. Tao Xian was completely thinking for himself, and Chu Xingmo couldn't immediately refuse without giving face. After Tao Xian left, Chu Xingmo stared at the computer screen and continued to daydream, working as a network administrator at Jiashi. It's indeed good, and Chu Xingmo believes that Tao Xian will never treat him unfairly. However, when he thought about the possible situation, Chu Xingmo hesitated and continued to search on the website. I'm afraid it's enough. It seems that even if one's abilities are good and cheap, few units dare to use their own. I'm so annoyed. Chu Xingmo weakly crawled onto the table and shouted irritably. Because he was wearing headphones and didn't notice his volume, the guests sitting around Chu Xingmo kept glancing at him. What was going on with this person? Are you crazy? Is it okay to keep yelling and yelling all this time? Brother, can I move my bag a bit? Someone beside me said. Oh, I'm sorry, Chu Xingmo said apologetically as he took his backpack away from the seat beside him. Thank you. Those people smiled indifferently and pulled out their chairs to sit down. Chu Xingmo clicked on the webpage and continued flipping through the job postings. 10 minutes later, he obediently lifted his head from the screen and the website was pulled to the end. No one really used him. Feeling extremely agitated, what should I do now? Go back. It's impossible. Although his master and the villagers may not say anything when he goes back, he will definitely look down on himself. It's really embarrassing. He fled back just a week after going out, feeling like he had lost a battle, with no face to think. It seems that we can only work with Tao Xian for a while. With a resigned sigh, Chu Xingmo wanted to go find Tao Xian to agree to this matter. He stood up and glanced at the screen of the people around him, and then stopped standing up. Hey! This is... On the screen is a video of an online game that Chu Xingmo has never seen before. The character holding a silver long sword is dodging in embarrassment under the attack of a large black cat monster. However, this person's level is not commendable. He suddenly flashes left and right, and unexpectedly receives the monster's attack multiple times. The green health bar in the upper left corner drops rapidly, quickly flashing red. This doesn't work, it's too slow to react. Although I don't quite understand what this game is, Chu Xingmo can still see that this person's level is not very good. The attacks that need to be blocked are not blocked, and the attacks that need to be flashed have been eaten all over. His health has dropped to 20%, and the health of the cat monster is still fully 80%. Sure enough, this person's character was quickly killed, and a gray font with swords and spears popped up on the screen, failing. Damn it. It's not over again. The person pulled off their headphones and impatiently slammed them onto the keyboard. Chu Xingmo carefully scrutinized the person at this moment, observing their attire from top to bottom. Chu Xingmo immediately judged that this person was definitely a wealthy second generation, probably about the same age as himself. Hey, brother, what are you doing? The person glanced at Chu Xingmo and pointed to the device with a card inserted in the corner of the computer desktop, speaking impatiently, Glory, don't you know? Chu Xingmo didn't care about the other person's tone because he really didn't know. From childhood to adulthood, he has almost never entered an internet cafe more than the number of fingers on one hand, most of which are still used to search for information. Although I haven't played many games, I have seen pigs run even if I haven't eaten pork. In just a few minutes of observation, Chu Xingmo can be completely certain that this unknown game is definitely the most outstanding game he has ever seen in his life. The realistic picture quality, seamless impact, and Chu Xingmo's unprecedented high degree of freedom of operation all opened his eyes. Not to mention anything else, it's up to this person to manipulate the character into almost human-like rolling and squatting postures. Chu Xingmo had long been amazed in his heart. Seeing Chu Xingmo not answering, the young man had no intention of continuing to argue with him. He turned around and returned to the computer screen in front of him. Which one, can I give it a try? Just as I was about to put on my headphones, I suddenly heard Chu Xingmo's voice. The young man stopped his movements impatiently, turned his head and looked up and down at him with a skeptical gaze. You. Are you okay? Give it a try. Chu Xingmo smiled. Anyway, you don't have any losses. If you fail, I'll cover your internet expenses. Turning his head, he scanned back and forth between the computer screen and Chu Xingmo. The young man dressed as a wealthy man hesitated. Indeed, as Chu Xingmo said, failure didn't cost him much, at best it was just a waste of time. Internet fees. He really didn't notice any small amount of money. But if he wins, he will finally get the materials he has been thinking about for several days. Honor is a game that has just been released for less than a year, and he just wants to spend money to buy strategies, so he doesn't have any way to find someone to play for him. But the question is this kid who looks like a country bumpkin dressed up okay? Under Chu Xingmo's smiling gaze, the young man stood up and gave up his seat. Okay, you try, but I'll tell you first. If it fails, I won't want your little internet fee. What should you do? Don't wander in front of me, young master. No problem, but you need to teach me how to operate this game first, Chu Xingmo agreed and then pointed to the young man's computer screen. The young man's mouth twitched as he became even more pessimistic about Chu Xingmo, but he patiently guided him. This is an attack, this dodge, these two keys roll, and these are a few that adjust the perspective. The young man explained in detail to Chu Xingmo from beginning to end, and surprisingly, there were over 20 key positions involved, of which 10 were conventional key positions. Then there are corresponding key positions on the skill screen. Do you understand? The young man sat in Chu Xingmo's seat, waiting to see him embarrass. Who knew that Chu Xingmo's face was very calm and he nodded calmly, that's all. Okay, I remember. Isn't it? The young man almost doubted life. When he first started playing Honor, it took him almost a day to just memorize these skill buttons. But now, this obviously new kid who has just been exposed to Honor, how could he possibly remember all of these? He must have pretended, the young man thought confidently. He really underestimated Chu Xingmo. Although he had never been exposed to this game, his memory was almost top-notch from childhood to adulthood. As long as it was something he had seen, he couldn't say that everything was unforgettable. There was no problem memorizing it. It was really naive to think about these currently no more than 30 key positions that stumped him. Spending a few minutes familiarizing oneself with skills and combos, then Chu Xingmo clicked on the screen with the mouse, and soon the page reloaded back to the scene where the mission had just begun. Taking advantage of the gap before the battle began, Chu Xingmo clicked on the panel to carefully observe the character he was going to use now. The character name is Imperial Power Brocade Clothes, a professional swordsman with a level of 25. He uses weapons to fly and has a uniform blue quality in terms of equipment. Chu Xingmo has points in his mind, and his gaze shifts to the character's attributes. He is not very clear about what these numbers represent, but it does not prevent him from steadily copying these numbers into his brain. Record these values. Chu Xingmo exits the character panel, and in the task interface, click which bright red one to load. The reading is completed, and in the dazzling moment, the Imperial Power and Brocade Robe enter the mission scene. It is a plain grassland, and the cat monster seen by Long Xingye earlier also appears on the other end of the screen. However, this time Chu Xingmo has transformed from an observer to a person fighting head-on. Since it's a mission, the monster's information can naturally be viewed. Chu Xingmo clicks on the boss introduction in the upper right corner, including the level 20 Shadow Spirit Cat, Quick Attack, Profession tendencies towards Thief, Assassin, and then various miscellaneous items such as health and mana. Chu Xingmo quickly closed the page, and there was nothing unusual about these things. It was just that he had just started playing this game and needed to have a rough understanding of the enemy units inside. The preparation time was over, and the Shadow Spirit Cat howled and rushed towards the Imperial Power Genie who was staying in place. At this moment, the wealthy young man sat on Chu Xingmo's chair, staring intently at his every move. When he saw Chu Xingmo clicking on the information page in a dignified manner, he still felt a bit indifferent, thinking that the other party was just pretending. His contempt for Chu Xingmo was even stronger, but as the battle began, what he saw in front of him almost didn't make him burst into tears. The Imperial Power Brocade Robe, which was originally extremely stiff under his control, seemed to have been infused with soul at this moment. Every attack was extremely precise, and every block and dodge was as precise as calculated. He had just hit the Shadow Spirit Cat, which he had no fighting power against, but now it seemed like a house cat with no threat, pinching it as he wanted. At the beginning, it can be seen that Chu Xingmo has never been in contact with honor at all. Under the attack of Shadow Cat, he felt a bit embarrassed and his health decreased by 20%. However, in less than half a minute, Chu Xingmo seemed to have fully adapted to the operation of the game, and every attack was impeccable. Seeing Chu Xingmo's current performance, who would dare to say that he was just a newcomer who had never been in contact with honor? Is Chu Xingmo really a genius in gaming? Of course not. He was able to achieve this level entirely thanks to Chen Huayang's training since childhood. Has he ever tried to use the human eye to capture the traces of flies dancing? Have you experienced the sour taste of peeling hundreds of corn roots with your hands? What's even more terrifying is that time constraints need to be added to these trainings. Repeating these exercises day after day, Chu Xingmo's eyes and hand muscles have long been exercised to an unimaginable level. When he brings these into the game, what he intuitively reflects is his incredible dynamic vision and astonishing hand speed. In his eyes, the attack of the Shadow Spirit Cat was as slow as a stuttering PPT. Before the attack was completely completed, the block had already been taken. With the super expert speed blessing, the Shadow Spirit Cat was still in a stiff moment, and the counterattack of the Imperial Power Brocade had already fallen into a storm. Upward thrust, sword drawn slash, continuous thrust, and 3-section slash are all low-level skills of swordsmen, and the CD is very short. Therefore, these attacks were continuously attacked by Chu Xingmo in a very short time. Amidst the shadows of swords and knives, blood splashed like raindrops. The blood bars of the Shadow Cat rapidly descended at a visible speed to the naked eye, dodging its shimmering claws. After the cooldown was over, it drew its sword and swung it towards the ferocious cat's head. Glory! The remaining few health bars were instantly cleared, and golden regular script characters flashed onto the screen. At the same time, a prominent system message popped up in the chat box in the lower left corner. The player, Imperial Power Brocade Clothes, kills the Shadow Cat to create the shortest time record in this area, level 25, time 1 minute and 5 seconds. The glory world instantly boiled, and players rushed to the bottom of this system message one after another, generously expressing their admiration. I'll go, awesome. The great god is amazing. Killing the Shadow Cat in 1 minute and 5 seconds at level 25 is too impressive, isn't it? Boss, please take me. Chu Xingmo smiled bitterly and glanced at the exaggerated praise, then glanced at the 2 character nicknames under his newly created first place on the record list. Autumn of One Leaf and Autumn Musu, with a time of 1 minute 10 seconds and 1 minute 12 seconds. It's less than 10 seconds away from me, Chu Xingmo exclaimed in admiration, but he didn't take it too seriously. He turned his head to look at the wealthy young man beside him, who was stunned. Look, we won. The young man closed his chin, which was about to fall to the ground, and moved his gaze stiffly like a puppet, his gaze fixed on the sparkling record on the screen. For a moment, he made a move that shocked Chu Xingmo. Master. The young man stood up lightning fast, knelt down on one knee and clasped his fists in one fell swoop, his eyes shining as he stared at Chu Xingmo, who was at a loss. Take the disciple. Chu Xingmo was speechless and chaotic. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Practice on behalf of others. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Practice on behalf of others. The guests of Jiashi Internet Cafe all saw a strange scene. A handsome-looking lunatic had a wealthy-looking lunatic next to him, and this later lunatic was kneeling on one knee and clasping his fists in front of the previous person, shouting that he wanted to learn. Is this a way of communication between lunatics? So unique. Has the wall of any mental hospital collapsed? Someone made such a hilarious comment. I don't know. He looks quite handsome, I didn't expect to have such a good taste. What a pity, I originally came with the dish I wanted. Chu Xingmo was not wearing headphones at the moment, and the whispers around him were clearly transmitted to his ears, making him feel on pins and needles for a moment. Seeing the young man in front of him, who looked like a wealthy man, still couldn't figure out the situation. Chu Xingmo's head was getting bigger and he quickly helped him up. Come on, let's stand up and say anything. He didn't want to be watched with monkey-like eyes from the zoo. The wealthy young man was probably a bit embarrassed, so he quickly sat down on the chair and stared at Chu Xingmo with keen eyes, looking like a pervert who saw a beautiful woman. Chu Xingmo's scalp was tingling as he stared at him. Fortunately, his psychological resilience was relatively strong, and he waved his hand in front of the other person. Well, brother, just tell me what you need. I'm so scared from that perspective. Sorry about that. The wealthy young man finally realized and felt a bit ashamed of his extreme reaction. He extended his right hand to Chu Xingmo and said, "Hello, my name is Jin Fugue. I haven't asked my brother for his surname yet." Jin Fugue. It is indeed quite wealthy. Chu Xingmo made a sarcastic remark in his heart, but his face remained unchanged. He shook hands with the other person's outstretched palm in mid-air and said, "Chu Xingmo, hello." Without much entanglement in this regard, Jin Fugue released his palm and pointed to the record list on Chu Xingmo's computer. "Well, Chu brothers, are you really playing honor for the first time?" "Yeah," Chu Xingmo nodded without concealing anything and took out a flat train ticket from his pocket. "Look, I just arrived in H City a few days ago, and I haven't even heard of honor before." I took the train ticket handed by Chu Xingmo and looked around a few times. It was indeed a few days ago, and I believe the other party shouldn't have lied or deceived me. However, Jin Fugue struggled and looked at the shining name on the list. How can I explain this? Genius. Noticing that Chu Xingmo looked completely unaware of what had happened, Jin Fugue suddenly came up with this word in his heart. He is not without friends who show great talent when playing a strange game for the first time, but he is still the first to see someone as talented as Chu Xingmo. Jin Fugue made up his mind that no matter what, he must hold on to this thick thigh. Observing Jin Fugue's deliberately suppressed expression of excitement, Chu Xingmo was puzzled. Isn't it just a game record list, this guy? As for being so excited. In fact, this is not a big deal about wealth and status, but rather Chu Xingmo, who has almost never been exposed to online games, does not understand the benefits involved. Regardless of the record or the number of players in any online game, as long as one can win first place, even if there is no actual benefit, speaking out is still a very shameful thing. In other words, the satisfaction of vanity is huge, especially when friends around play this game. The strength of the long face will be infinitely amplified. In this way, brother Xingmo, you see, we've also gotten to know each other. I saw your level just now, why don't you take me with you in the future? Jin Fugue said with a harmonious smile on his face as he hit the snake stick. Taking you with me? Chu Xingmo smiled bitterly. If I had this condition, I wouldn't mind, but now I don't even have an account for this game, so I can't help it anymore. This is the truth. Not to mention that he doesn't have much money left on him. Even if he has wealthy money, he wouldn't use it to buy an online game account. He just roughly understood that the account card for this game needs to be purchased for a fee, not distributed for free, which also explains why Chu Xingmo has never seen anyone play this game in the past few days. Well, that's it. Seeing that the other party was probably feeling shy, Jin Fugue didn't show any disdain, which made Chu Xingmo feel a bit fond of this guy he just met. It's okay, it's just a small problem. Jin Fugue pondered for a moment, then waved his big hand and said arrogantly, "Do you think I'll give you an account card, or something? How about you just use my account? I'll give it to you. Send me." Chu Xingmo pointed at himself in surprise, then turned to look at the Imperial Power brocade on the screen. Isn't this guy here to make himself happy? Leaving aside the hundreds of yuan account card, let's just talk about the money and time he invested in this character. It's probably a considerable expense, right? Such an account can be given as a gift. This is all worth it. Jin Fugue is very confident in this. If he had not seen Chu Xingmo's operation before, he would never have been so generous, but the level demonstrated by Chu Xingmo just now made him certain that this seemingly unknown young man is definitely a great god. Although this great god has not yet risen, who can imagine his future height? For such a potential stock, these early investments are definitely worth it. As for the Imperial Power brocade clothes, he has only been playing for less than a week. Although he has spent a lot of money, it is just a small matter, and it cannot be said that he has such a deep affection for the character. How about it? If you're not satisfied with this name and image, I can offer you money to buy a name change card and image card. Jin Fugue continued to increase his chips. This under the attack of Jin Fugue, Chu Xingmo felt a bit moved. Of course, he changed his mind at random. I'm afraid few people would not be moved by the other side's almost free action. But the question is, why did this guy do this? Are you really interested in your own technology? Chu Xingmo hesitated a bit in his heart. After all, he had a strong defense against others. Who knows if this guy came to frame himself? Seeing Chu Xingmo still having some doubts and Jin Fugue also feeling a bit anxious, his gaze turned and he suddenly caught a glimpse of the screen on the computer in front of his seat, and his heart immediately began to count. I believe Brother Chu was worried about finding a job just now, right? Jin Fugue pointed to the screen on the computer and said with a smile. Chu Xingmo nodded without denying that he did need to find a job. Just now, helping Jin Fugue clear the level was just being attracted by glory, and he hasn't forgotten the main thing yet. But I'm only 18 years old in 2 months, so I searched for several days but couldn't find it, Chu Xingmo honestly explained. There's nothing to hide about these situations, so it's okay for this guy to know. Actually, the Chu brothers overlooked that there is a very suitable job right now in front of you. Jin Fugue smiled mysteriously. Oh. Chu Xingmo was really curious now, staring at Jin Fugue in confusion. Listening to what he meant, it seemed that the guy in front of him, who was obviously a second-generation wealthy man, wanted to introduce himself to a job. Seeing Chu Xingmo's expectant gaze, Jin Fugue smiled and waved his hand. Don't misunderstand, I didn't mean I wanted to introduce you to a job. Although he does have this ability, those jobs also require him to be at least 18 years old before he can apply. That's what I'm talking about, Jin Fugue said, pointing to the screen on the computer, facing Chu Xingmo's disappointed gaze. Glory. Honor. Not bad. Jin Fugue nodded confidently. The Chu brothers have just arrived in H City and still know something. Although Honor is just a game that has just emerged for more than half a year, it already has a wide range of players. But because the difficulty of the game is very high, it has caused a headache for many people, said Jin Fugue. But with the Chu brothers' abilities, it seems that the difficulty level of these dungeons is completely unbearable for you, right? After hesitating for a moment, Chu Xingmo nodded. Even if the difficulty of Honor was even harder than what he had just seen, it was not a big problem for him. He had this confidence. So, the Chu brothers can definitely go and help others practice. Jin Fugue was a bit excited, and finally got to the point. Acting trainer. Chu Xingmo was puzzled. That's right, it's just a substitute training. Jin Fugue's expression was resolute. It's about helping people level up or completing some difficult dungeons. Although the price is not very high, it's still a considerable income. At this point, Jin Fugue didn't say much and leaned back in his chair, smiling at Chu Xingmo. Chu Xingmo is not a fool either. He understands what the other person is saying, and after careful consideration, he realizes that this is indeed the most suitable job for him at the moment. He just needs to stay in the internet cafe every day to help others improve, and there are not so many risks. Although it is feasible to work as an internet administrator in the Tao Xian Internet Cafe, he finally gave up the idea of the potential trouble it may bring to Tao Xian. This account, give it to me. Chu Xingmo pointed to the Imperial Power brocade on the computer and smiled. Jin Fugue's slightly chubby face was so full of smiles that even his eyebrows were gone. After so much effort, this expert finally figured it out. Send it to you. Jin Fugue immediately agreed, with an eager expression as if afraid that Chu Xingmo would retract. And all that I just said also counts. And I can also introduce people to you. I have many friends around me who want to find someone to help them practice. I think they will be very happy to know this news. The other party spoke up for this reason, and Chu Xingmo no longer pretended to be reserved in his refusal. Moreover, at the moment, he really needs such an opportunity. So, Chu Xingmo smiled and extended his palm. Happy cooperation. Happy cooperation. The palms of the two clapped heavily together. Jin Fugue was very happy. Although the cooperation between the two seemed to be a disadvantage for him, he knew in his heart that operating such things was difficult to measure in terms of money. What was the money invested earlier? As long as there was such a great God, not all of those things would be easily captured, and those valuable materials and rare equipment that were not in the market were not as simple as finding things from a bag. Therefore, this transaction is completely cost-effective. Chu Xingmo is also very happy. He has finally found a job. Although this job may seem unstable, he still has a source of income no matter what. He doesn't have to worry about running out of money and going to waste it. Moreover, most importantly, he is also very interested in honor. What should I do now? Chu Xingmo asked as his gaze turned back to the screen in front of him. You just need to level up your character now. Look, here. At the other end of the Jiashi Internet Cafe, a young man wearing a gray-white hoodie sat on the seat, and the scene in front of him was the record list of Chu Xingmo's previous clearance. Can you actually reach 1 minute and 5 seconds? It's really amazing. The boy stared at the towering name and whispered in praise. That's the nickname, Imperial Power Brocade Clothes. Why does it have a strong nouveau riche flavor? Ha ha ha, I'm laughing to death. On the seat next to the boy wearing orange short sleeves vigorously patted his shoulder and mocked him without hesitation. I didn't expect Xiu, your record could be broken by such a guy. I'm really laughing to death, ha ha ha. Glancing at the young man next to him with tears coming out of his laughter, Xiu rudely retorted, what are you laughing at? At least I'm still the second one, and you? You just dropped to the end of the crane. How could you laugh? Cough, cough, cough. The boy's laughter came to an abrupt end, as if a duck suddenly being pinched by someone's neck was coughing awkwardly. I don't care, the young man shrugged nonchalantly as he calmed down. As long as you're not the first, I'll be very happy. Don't play tricks, Su Muqiu. Xiu shook his head helplessly, too lazy to listen to this guy's trash talk, with a serious expression on his face. Aren't you curious about who broke our records with this nickname? Upon hearing this, Su Muqiu also got serious and leaned in front of Xiu's computer. Yes, you said before that 1 minute and 10 seconds were the limit, but this guy who came out of nowhere forcefully shortened your time by 5 seconds. Turning his gaze to Xiu, who was pondering on his chin, Su Muqiu curiously asked, how did he do it? Glory now has a lot of people in its district, but it's definitely not many. As a player of the Imperial Power Genie, they have naturally seen it before, and there is nothing unusual about it. But everything they see now clearly tells them that this character with no outstanding features has broken the highest record set by the two of them. I don't know. Xiu shook his head slightly, I'm also very curious. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Arena. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Arena. In the Glory map, Chu Xingmo is operating his brand new character, the Holy Sword Xiang, and wandering within the leveling area. Along the roads on both sides, low-level dead creatures of the Dark series occasionally appear. Chu Xingmo's fingers quickly tapped on the keyboard, and the Holy Sword Xiang took a wrong step at his feet and dodged all the incoming attacks. The orange martial wind thunder in his hand continued to attack the surrounding area without decreasing. In less than a minute, the zombies and some low-level melee skeletons in the field have been almost swept away by the holy sword Xiang, leaving only some distant skeleton archers and skeleton mages. Swinging his sword and shooting arrows, Chu Xingmo adjusted his perspective to carefully examine the situation in the field. In the level 27 training zone, the small monster had high attack and defense, but unfortunately, its movement and attack speed were slow, especially for Chu Xingmo, who had much higher dynamic vision than ordinary people. The small monster's movements were simply slowed down in frames before his eyes. When clearing the last small monster in the game, a sudden mutation occurred, and the bright red blood mist condensed into a humanoid monster. Buried in Bones level 27 wild map boss Blood Gunslinger Yage. The boss appeared without any ink stains, and the blood gun raised its hand to shoot. The bright red bullet with carved patterns cut through the air and shot towards the holy sword Xiang. Rolling and dodging the incoming bullets, Chu Xingmo hesitated on his face, unsure whether his luck was good or bad. This was not the first time he had encountered this wild map boss in the past 2 days. At first, he tried to forcefully challenge this guy with his super high hand speed and vision. However, the wild map boss had to team up to pass smoothly. Yage's shooting ability was insignificant to Chu Xingmo, but the trouble was his ability to summon the undead army. Even though he can maintain the health of the holy sword Xiang at a very healthy level with his hand speed, he has limited options for the character's mana. In the end, after 3 encounters with Chu Xingmo, he could only manipulate the holy sword Xiang and regretfully exit. Forget it, let's do it this time. Anyway, the task has been completed, Chu Xingmo thought to himself, manipulating the character to exit the buried bones. The holy sword Xiang returned to the main city, and Chu Xingmo submitted the necessary materials for the mission. After receiving the mission reward, he clicked on the current character information. Character: Holy Sword Xiang, level 27, Professional Swordsman, Weapon level 20 Orange Martial Light Sword Wind Thunder, Silver White Sword Body with Black Hilt, perfectly complementing the black streamlined robe on Holy Sword Xiang's body. Chu Xingmo nodded slightly, satisfied with the character name and image he had chosen. Thinking about Jin Fugue's previous color scheme of either gold or silver, he couldn't help but laugh and laugh. He couldn't bear the tone of a nouveau riche. But it has to be said that the efficiency of this nouveau riche is indeed commendable. On the day when the two of them just agreed to cooperate, Jin Fugue not only prepared a name-changing card and an image card for him, but also contacted many clients who were on his behalf. It is unclear where this guy's great enthusiasm came from. Opening the character panel, after completing this wave of tasks, the Holy Sword Xiang has already acquired 540 skill points. These 540 skill points are the result of his hard work day and night in the past 2 days. Through these 2 days, he has gained a preliminary understanding of honor. He can avoid tasks with experience equipment rewards, but skill points cannot be ignored because they are particularly important for the future development of the character. In addition, there are 4 basic attributes that reward attribute points: strength, intelligence, physical strength, and spirit. Strength affects attributes such as physical attack, defense, and weight-bearing. Intelligence affects the amount of spell attack, defense, and mana. Physical strength is directly related to the character's health and durability. As for spirit, it is the effect of some state skills and one's ability to resist abnormal states. The 4 major attributes naturally grow as the character's level increases. As for the growth rate of each profession after level 20 full time, the attribute rewards given in tasks are almost equal. The current profession of Shengjian Qianying is swordsman and has completed a job transfer. Its strength and stamina attributes are quite outstanding, while the other 2 attributes are relatively careless. Opening the character skill tree, when Jin Fugue used it earlier, his skills were almost randomly selected, which forced Chu Xingmo to reset the skill tree and make new choices. Upon arriving at the General Skill Master, Chu Xingmo first spent 20 skill points to learn 2 general skills. Sprint and Roll, giving the character 2 more movement options, and then went on to learn professional skills. With this in mind, he knew very well which skills were most practical for him in the Holy Sword Qianying stage. It goes without saying that Jin Fugui has already clicked on techniques such as uphill blocking, block blocking, and continuous thrust. However, Chu Xingmo has his own ideas about adding points to his skills. Unlike Jin Fugui's 3rd level block, Chu Xingmo chose 2nd level block and 5th level continuous thrust because he always believes that the best defense is attack. Subsequently, the intermediate skills of Silver Light Falling Blade and Blade Pulling Slash, Chu Xingmo, also reached a relatively high level. After all, the level of Holy Sword Qianying is too low now, and the attack methods are still relatively limited. Swordsmen are also a profession that lacks control, so Chu Xingmo still attaches great importance to these attack skills. Use the remaining skill points to upgrade to level 25. Just learn the 3-section slash, and after completing all of this, there are still quite a few 340 skill points left. This is also an unavoidable thing. Honor's current level limit is 45, and his 27 levels seem too far behind, but it's still enough. Quitting the game and kicking his account card back into his pocket, Chu Xingmo looked at it as it was already 3 a.m. He rubbed his slightly sore eyes and yawned wearily. For the past 2 days, he has been playing Honor in the internet cafe almost every day, either practicing on his own or helping others. He has hardly rested. Although his wallet is quite thick, he is really exhausted. Just squint for a while, Chu Xingmo closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair, falling into a deep sleep. "Young man, come and let me know." The ant who cleaned the internet cafe patted Chu Xingmo's shoulder, gesturing for him to temporarily get up. "Oh, good." Although Qin Meng was a bit annoyed by being disturbed by someone, Chu Xingmo was not the kind of unreasonable person. He picked up his backpack and walked towards the bar. "Zhang, I'll put my bag here first, and I'll go out." Arriving at the internet cafe counter, Tao Xian was not there, and Chu Xingmo smiled at Xiao Zhang, who had finished his night shift. "Okay, just leave it where you want it." Thanks to Tao Xian's connections, the staff at the internet cafe and Chu Xingmo have also been very familiar these past few days. They didn't pay much attention to this small matter and pointed to the corner of the bar, saying, "Thank you, Brother Zhang," said Chu Xingmo. "It's a small matter, come back and help me bring breakfast." "No problem." Stepping out of the internet cafe, Chu Xingmo greedily took a breath of fresh air outside. While staying in the cafe, he didn't feel much, but as soon as he came out, he suddenly felt a refreshing sensation. Having had breakfast at a nearby breakfast shop, Chu Xingmo wrapped his coat tightly and walked towards the nearby moat park. Now that the season was gradually entering autumn, the cold wind woke up his somewhat chaotic brain from staying up late. Standing by the railing of the moat, gazing at the misty scene in the distance, Chu Xingmo's mind was filled with thoughts. "I don't know what my master is doing now." For the first time in 17 years, this was the first time he had been so far away from home, and his mind naturally remembered everyone in Fuse village. What should I do in my future life? Continuously helping others practice on behalf of others is obviously not a long-term solution. It seems that we still need to trouble Tao Xian. It's only 2 months and there shouldn't be any problems. Exhaling a cold breath, Chu Xingmo took out the dragon and phoenix jade pendant that Chen Huayang had given him before leaving, and looked at it. His mother's voice and smile gradually reappeared before his eyes. "Mom." With a heavy sigh, he kicked the jade pendant back into his clothes and paced slowly along the riverbank. 2 young men of his age walked towards him, and Chu Xingmo didn't pay much attention. He glanced at them casually, and the 3 of them passed by. The sound of their conversation could be faintly heard in the wind. "Oh Yi Xiu, it's so cold." "Cold. Cold is right, who made you wear such thin clothes?" "I'll go, Yi Xiu, you inhumane guy." Chu Xingmo turned his head and glanced at the gradually receding figures of the 2, with a longing expression in his eyes. It's really nice. Xiu, who was walking ahead, seemed to have a feeling as he turned around to look at Chu Xingmo's already blurred back. What's wrong? What are you looking at? Su Muqiu asked. It's nothing, Xiu said, returning to the Jiashi internet cafe. He handed Xiaozhang the breakfast he had ordered. Chu Xingmo walked towards his usual seat and found that Jin Fugue was already sitting in a nearby seat today. You came early enough. Chu Xingmo pulled open his chair and sat down. Isn't it just that there's nothing going on today? Jin Fugue stopped his movements and turned his head. Handing the canned coffee to Chu Xingmo, here, it's for you. Thank you. The heated coffee dispelled the chill in his body, and Chu Xingmo looked at Jin Fugue's screen. After getting to know this guy, Chu Xingmo realized that Jin Fugue was indeed a good person. Although he came from a privileged family, he never showed a superior attitude. This is also why Chu Xingmo became friends with him. However, whether Chu Xingmo agreed to the other party's proposal of apprenticeship or not, he didn't want to be followed by someone of his age all day, calling him master. The scene was simply unbearable to look at. After giving the original imperial power brocade robe to Chu Xingmo, Jin Fugue casually bought another number, and quickly used his strong money ability to get himself a blue suit. However, he did not continue playing swordsman this time, but chose the profession of berserker. Don't you think the crazy swordsman is actually more suitable for me? Chu Xingmo asked this question, and Jin Fugue said so. Chu Xingmo didn't say much about it. After all, everyone has their own pursuits, but when it comes to naming, can't this guy be more reserved? Imperial power and wealth. Isn't it too flamboyant to be afraid that others won't know you're a RMB warrior? Chu Xingmo sipped his coffee and murmured in his heart. At this moment, Jin Fugue was operating his shining imperial power and fighting in the leveling area. With the help of Chu Xingmo and his strong money ability, the level of the imperial power and wealth quickly returned to level 25. However, his operation was still so admirable. Chu Xingmo put down his coffee can and turned his attention back to his computer. As long as he saw the blood splattering out of Jin Fugue under the attack of a small monster in the buried bones land, as well as the decreasing blood bar, he had already seen the final outcome. Take him with you when you have time, Chu Xing thought to himself. After all, Jin Fugue was really good to him, and now the holy sword Qianying is still a gift from someone else. He always repays any kindness he has. Insert the card, log in, and load the holy sword Qianying into the main city map. I'll go to the arena and play for a while. Let's wait until you finish reading. Chu Xingmo put on his headphones and said. Jin Fugue stared at his computer screen and nodded quickly without looking back. The fight was quite anxious, and Chu Xingmo glanced at it, already red blood helplessly shaking his head. Chu Xingmo opened the arena, and the holy sword Qianying entered the arena to wait for a match. The arena matching system of honor is not much different from ordinary online games. It matches opponents who are similar to oneself based on one's own level. Chu Xingmo has also played many times in recent days, but almost all of the opponents he met were of similar level to Jin Fugue, and he could hardly hold on for 30 seconds under his command. The current time has stopped scrolling, and the matching has been completed to enter the loading interface. At the moment of seeing the matching opponent, Chu Xingmo's relaxed gaze instantly focused, and a rare seriousness emerged from his face. Autumn of One Leaf, Level 28 Combat Mage. He remembers that the person who ranked second on the previous Shadow Cat record was only 5 seconds behind his own record. It's finally interesting. Is it him? At this moment, Xiu, who was sitting at the other end of the Jiashi internet cafe, also showed a hint of vibration in his pupils when he saw his opponent on the loading interface. Who is it? Su Muqiu, who was sitting next to him, heard his surprised murmur and quickly spoke up to ask. Holy Sword Qianying, level 27 swordsman, what's so strange about it? This person is likely the one who broke the record before, Xiu said. Are you sure? Su Muqiu's face was surprised. I'm not very sure, Xiu shook his head. I'll know after typing, and renaming cards are not uncommon. Su Muqiu nodded repeatedly, ready to concentrate on watching the battle when Tao Xian, the owner of Jiashi Internet Cafe, shouted in his voice. Xiu, Su Muqiu, there's a problem with Unit 3. Who of you should go and take a look? I'll go. Su Muqiu stood up and patted Xiu's shoulder before leaving. Come on, don't lose. Xiu smiled without hesitation. Finally, the loading interface is complete, and both characters enter the arena. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Clash of Electric Firestones. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The Clash of Electric Firestones. The loading interface is complete, and the Holy Sword Xianying and Xiu enter the arena at the same time. Chu Xingmo slightly adjusts his perspective and looks at the figure standing on the other side of the arena with a spear. Hello, Xiu took the lead in typing on the channel. Hello, Chu Xingmo politely responded to him. Add a friend after finishing the fight. Xiu asked. Chu Xingmo smiled, he had this intention. If many dungeons in honor were played alone, even at his level, it would be troublesome. With such strong support, he would not refuse to actively invite them. Okay. After finishing this sentence, Chu Xingmo didn't say any more nonsense, and the holy sword shot out like 1,000 sharp arrows. So fast. Seeing the speed of the holy sword Xianying, Xiu's heart trembled. His previous speculation became even more certain, and he also wielded his spear to greet Xiu. The arena for single-player battles is not large, and the distance of 4.5 body positions at the speed of 2 people is almost a waste of time. The spear in Xiu's hand collided fiercely with the wind and thunder, and it has to be said that the environment rendering of honor has reached a very realistic level. The collision caused waves of flying sand and stones, and the 2 people in front of the screen can even feel the storm brought by this collision. The attack was blocked, and Chu Xingmo was not surprised. If the opponent really couldn't even stop this attack, it means his judgment was completely ridiculous. However, this also does indicate that this one-leaf autumn is definitely a master. Chu Xingmo was very excited because he had met someone who could truly rival him for the first time. Fingers swiftly tapped on the keyboard, and the holy sword Xianying retreated with a thrust, heading straight towards the autumn gate of one leaf. Although this sword came almost nowhere to be found, with Xiu's level, he was clearly not hit by this kind of attack. His body flickered left and right, avoiding the fierce sword. The attribute-free dazzling pattern appeared at the feet, and the speed of one-leaf autumn skyrocketed again, relying on the length of the battle spear to suppress the evasion space of the holy sword Xianying. Dragon Fang. A low-level skill of a combat mage, hitting it will cause the target to enter a brief state of rigidity. As the holy sword Xianying was about to be pierced by this blow, it leaped up like lightning, accurately and perfectly blocking the seemingly unavoidable blow. Silver light falling blade. Blood splattered from the chest of one leaf's autumn, and even though Xiu's operation was excellent, he could not respond to this blow during his stiff state of missing Dragon Fang. Chu Xingmo's face was calm, relying on his dynamic vision and almost non-human hand speed. He dodged the Dragon Fang that Xiu must have obtained. This move must be avoided, otherwise if the holy sword Xianying enters a stiff state, with the opponent's demonstrated ability, he will definitely face a storm-like combo in the future. Although he has a slight advantage in the current situation, Chu Xingmo is not at all careless in his heart. This is his first time fighting against a true honor master. The pressure brought to him by Xiu is too great, and the attack is slightly relaxed. Chu Xingmo is sure that the stable situation will inevitably flip. Sitting next to him, Jin Fugue was completely dumbfounded. The confrontation between the two seemed complicated just now, but in fact, it was only about 10 seconds. The fleeting confrontation between the two made him dizzy and mesmerized. The swift attack of Yi Qiu and the precise counterattack of the holy sword Qianing made Jin Fugui feel like everything happening in front of him was like a dream. How impressive, came a deliberately suppressed excited shout from behind. Jin Fugui turned his head and saw that a large crowd of onlookers had appeared behind Chu Xingmo at some point. The crowd looked at Chu Xingmo's screen and whispered in admiration. "Brother, can we watch from behind you?" Someone asked Jin Fugui. Okay. Jin Fugui nodded quickly, joking that there were so many people. He dared to say that if he didn't agree, he would probably be killed by one person's spit. He glanced at Chu Xingmo's expressionless face, thinking that the other party wouldn't mind. He knew that Chu Xingmo's energy was completely focused on these things at this moment, and Ye Zhiqiu's insight into Qiuhao's counterattack ability made him dare not relax the current attack rhythm at all. What's the noise over there? After tidying up Unit 3, Su Muqiu looked up at the noisy crowd in the distance, intending to squeeze in and watch. However, looking at the already crowded crowd, Su Muqiu hesitated and finally gave up, turning around and walking towards the bathroom. Chu Xingmo's face was tense, his attack was as fast as a sword, and his extremely high hand speed advantage was exquisitely displayed. Triple slash. The holy sword Thousand Shadows revolved around the high speed path of Yi Zhiqiu, and the sword rain danced like lightning. The speed was dazzling, and under this thunderous attack, Yi Zhiqiu's life rapidly declined at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just when everyone thought that Yi Zhiqiu had lost his ability to fight back, Yi Xiu made his counterattack. The falling flower palm connected to the round dance stick, and the illusion surrounding the autumn of one leaf instantly shattered. In the midst of the electric light and firestones, Yi Xiu calmly found the true body of the holy sword Qianing among the many remnants, and used the powerful blowing effect of the falling flower palm to directly repel the opponent. Although relying on the enhancement effect of ice attribute dazzling patterns to resist the sword power of the holy sword Qianing and break the opponent's attack rhythm, the pressure Yi Qiu faces is far from as simple as it seems. However, at least now it has stabilized. Everyone, including Jin Fugui, was dazzled and mesmerized by the sight, so nervous that they couldn't even catch their breath. The good words in their mouths could still be called out. In this round of confrontation, it seems as if it has been a fleeting time and a million years. All of us feel that the masters we have seen in the past are all his mother children fighting. Dang 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 dang. Like dense firecrackers, the sound of gold and iron echoed incessantly in the ears. One Leaf Autumn and the Holy Sword Thousand Shadows had once again engaged in an attack. After all, Yi Xiu and Chu Xingmo are both young people with strong blood and vitality. At this point, they no longer have the appearance of being humble with each other. Both of them have already made a real move. On the single-player arena in the arena, Yi Zhiqiu bounced left and right in a rapid retreat, his figure erratic, while the holy sword Qianing remained with him, relentlessly attacking. Bang! With a loud bang, Yi Zhiqiu, who was flying back, grabbed a loophole in the holy sword Qianing and suddenly leaned forward, like a transformation, flashing behind the holy sword Qianing. The already cooled dragon Fang lightning headed straight towards the back of the holy sword Qianing. And at the critical moment, the holy sword Thousand Shadows suddenly came to their senses and slashed at the point where the spear was exerting its power, blocking the blow. The eerie counterattack of Yi Zhiqiu and the swift resistance of the holy sword Qianing made all players present concentrate, hold their breath, and dazzle their minds. What kind of hand speed is this? What kind of operational skills are these two people really human? The battle in the field became increasingly fierce, and the health of the two quickly decreased in this almost endless confrontation. 65%, 75%, 50%, 60%, 35%, 50%, 20%, 30%, 10%, 15%. In the midst of lightning and fire, I saw the holy sword Qianing suddenly wielding his sword horizontally in his chest. The sword shone brightly and lightning struck towards the chest of One Leaf Autumn, pulling out his sword and chopping it. This sword, although separated from the screen, seems to make people truly feel the cold gleam of the sword's body. Fierce. All the players present who saw this scene quickly flashed this word in their minds. In the splashing of blood, the little remaining health of One Leaf Autumn instantly cleared to 0. Glory. Winning. Chu Xingmo released the keyboard and mouse, took a deep breath, and calmed down the stirring emotions in his heart. Although he won this victory, it was definitely a disastrous one for him. Chu Xingmo looked at himself with only 10% health left. If it weren't for relying on dynamic vision to seize a small opportunity in the dense and stormy attack of One Leaf Autumn in the end, the outcome of this battle would still be unknown. Yi Xiu has sent you a friend request. Do you agree? Chu Xingmo smiled and nodded in agreement. Amazing, Yi Xiu said in the dialogue box in the bottom left corner. Thank you. Let's compete together next time. Okay, Chu Xingmo agreed in one fell swoop. This level of expert is exactly what he needs now, whether as a teammate in the dungeon or a challenging opponent, it will greatly improve him. Ha! Chu Xingmo stretched lazily and was about to get up and rest when he turned his head and saw the crowd surrounding him, so shocked that he almost threw out his earphones. Master, take me with you. Begging to bring this, big shot. Little brother, can you add a friend? A beautiful girl looked at Chu Xingmo with bright big eyes. Chu Xingmo pleaded for help and looked at Jin Fugue beside him, only to see him looking at him with envy on his face. What are you jealous of, TMD? Hurry up and save me. Being pulled back and forth by a group of excited onlookers who couldn't stand it, Chu Xingmo glared at Jin Fugue with a grudge, so angry that he wanted to curse. What's going on over there? Su Muqiu, who came out of the restroom, looked at the bustling corner with confusion. Unfortunately, from his perspective, he could only see a young man's side face twisted by the crowd. Returning to Yi Xiu's seat, Su Muqiu eagerly asked him, How? As you said, I lost. Yi Xiu turned around and smiled calmly. What? Su Muqiu's surprised voice suddenly stopped as he saw the big failure on Yi Xiu's screen. Don't misunderstand, I didn't let the water out. I was really defeated by them in a dignified and direct manner. Su Muqiu was speechless, and he could see that Yi Xiu's heart was not calm at this moment, which surprised him even more. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Mantis catches cicadas. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Mantis catches cicadas, what do you think? Yi Xiu asked Su Muqiu beside him as he watched the battle video on the screen. Su Muqiu pondered as she dragged the video progress back. He has a strong insight and a quick reaction. The key is his hand speed. He should be even faster than you. As long as Su Muqiu watches the start of the Holy Sword Xiang and the several mysterious attacks in the middle, he can completely confirm his own judgment. He believes that Yi Xiu shares the same view with him. That's right, I think so too. As expected, Yi Xiu nodded in agreement with Su Muqiu's judgment. The only downside may be his experience. Yi Xiu dragged the mouse, and the video in front of him returned to the scene where the Holy Sword Xiang was repelled by the falling flower palm of Yi Xiu. Watching the figure of the Holy Sword Xiang regressing, Yi Xiu said, with his speed, he could have dodged this falling flower palm. If he dodged this strike, I'm afraid I would have fought even harder. Yi Xiu's inference is completely correct. After all, Chu Xingmo is just a novice player who has just been exposed to honor for just a week. Perhaps in terms of hand speed and vision, he is not weaker than Yi Xiu, and even surpasses him. However, in terms of understanding of the entire profession of honor, there is still a slight gap between him and Yi Xiu, who has a long gaming experience. His lack of understanding of combat mage skills prevented him from avoiding the falling flower palm, resulting in the coherent attack rhythm ultimately being broken by Yi Xiu. I made an appointment with him to book together, will you come or not? Su Muqiu, who was pondering, heard Yi Xiu's voice and suddenly came to her senses. Come on, I happen to want to know how strong this guy is who can even beat you. Su Muqiu put on her headphones, inserted her account card, and waited for the character to load. At this moment, Yi Xiu seemed to unintentionally ask, by the way, do you have any idea about the thing you said you wanted to make for me last time? Anla, Su Muqiu said without looking back, Inwu is not that simple. I still need a lot of materials, let's talk about it in a while. That's it. Yi Xiu nodded and didn't say anything more. Just as he was about to put on his headphones, he suddenly noticed the noisy crowd in the distance. What's going on over there? I don't know. Su Muqiu noticed the direction Yi Xiu was pointing in, feeling a bit puzzled. Maybe a group of people are celebrating something. Oh, really? Yi Xiu didn't care either. He wasn't a very lively person, and even if you were making a fuss, it had nothing to do with him. After finally dismissing the enthusiastic onlookers, Chu Xingmo was sitting slumped in his seat panting heavily, with his clothes torn and wrinkled. Jin Fugue leaned over with his dog legs, his expression somewhat awkward. Brother Chu, it wasn't that I didn't help you just now. You can see that everyone is really too enthusiastic, and I really can't do anything about it, he said. Pay attention to the wrinkled clothes on Chu Xingmo's body. Jin Fugue quickly said, don't worry, I'll take you to buy clothes at noon. Forget it. Chu Xingmo waved weakly, I'll just go by myself. I'm sure he can't wear this top anymore. He has changed clothes in his backpack, but they are all for seasonal changes. It's obviously not suitable to wear them at this time, but he won't bother Jin Fugue anymore. With just one piece of clothing, he can handle it with his almost day and night practice these days. Oh, that's okay. Jin Fugue scratched his head and couldn't say anything more. He could tell that Chu Xingmo was definitely the kind of person who didn't like to trouble others too much, so he didn't get along and ask for trouble. By the way, Xingmo, you were really impressive in that fight just now. Thinking of Chu Xingmo's almost inhuman operation just now, Jin Fugue became excited again. I feel like a swordsman is really the most suitable profession for you. You are simply a natural swordsman. You're just a natural swordsman, Chu Xing sat up silently and retorted unhappily. Although this is praising himself, why does it sound a bit off topic to him? It's like cursing, is it the most suitable profession for me? Chu Xingmo muttered to himself, but he had some other thoughts about Jin Fugue's words. Although it seems that the swordsman profession is indeed the most suitable for him during this period, for some reason, he always feels that there is still a gap between what he truly thinks and what he truly thinks. That feeling is like there is something higher waiting for him to explore in the dark. At this moment, Yi Xiu's team invitation came over, and Chu Xingmo put aside his mixed thoughts and clicked on the flashing team invitation. I happen to be going to the next dungeon with someone, do you want to join me? Glancing at the displayed dungeon information, the 23rd level dungeon of Frost Forest and the 28th level of One Leaf Autumn are clearly not aimed at leveling up, so it should be for the wild map boss Goblin Merchant Lauren. He has encountered this boss before, but Honor's setting is like that. No matter how strong the individual ability of the wild map boss is, it is difficult to match the team's output. Therefore, although Chu Xingmo has some ability, it is time-consuming and laborious, and there may be a risk of being robbed, so he ultimately had to regret missing it. Hey! Alright, but Jin Fugue was excited, but then hesitated a bit. My level won't cause any trouble, will it? He has a few pounds and a few tails, and he knows in his heart that the imperial power and wealth are only at level 25. It's not a big problem to go to the Frost Forest at this level, but if you brush the boss, it may become a burden for Chu Xingmo. Don't worry. Chu Xingmo smiled confidently, I'm here. The two of them are now considered friends, and Chu Xingmo certainly won't underestimate Jin Fugue just because his level is not enough. On the contrary, in his opinion, although Jin Fugue lacks some skills in operation, his level of consciousness is still very good, let alone he still owes each other a huge favor. That's good, Jin Fugue breathed a sigh of relief and accepted Chu Xingmo's invitation to join the team. The two of them entered the map, and Chu Xingmo saw a figure in a black and white long windbreaker waiting at the entrance of the frost forest, in addition to One Leaf Autumn. Xiu Musu, a level 28 sharpshooter, was the third person on the previous ranking. They were together, Chu Xingmo thought to himself and connected the team voice to greet the two. Hello, do you mind if I bring a friend? Xiu and Su Muqiu had long noticed the imperial power and wealth beside the holy sword Qianying. To be honest, both of them were startled by the other's flamboyant and wealthy nature. Of course not, Xiu smiled. Their original purpose was to invite Chu Xingmo. As for the imperial power and wealth, even if he was a useless RMB warrior, Xiu and Su Muqiu would not mind his existence for Chu Xingmo's sake. Upon hearing Xiu's voice, Chu Xingmo suddenly became puzzled. How could it feel like he had heard this voice somewhere? This is my friend, Autumn Musu, Xiu introduced. Hello, perhaps it was my own illusion, Chu Xingmo paused and politely replied. While Su Muqiu politely responded, she carefully scrutinized the guy who defeated Xiu. Isn't there anything unusual about it, but this voice seems a bit familiar. Su Muqiu also felt a bit strange in her heart. Speaking of which, Chu Xingmo had no reaction when he saw these two people. He was as calm and indifferent as facing an ordinary person. Jin Fugue beside him was not as calm as he was, and he couldn't help but greet them with excitement. Xiu and Xiu Musu, these are the two long-term top gods on the server ranking list. If it weren't for Chu Xingmo, who suddenly emerged as a dark horse, they would probably continue to dominate the list. Unexpectedly, due to Chu Xingmo's reasons, he could have come into contact with such a high-level god. Jin Fugue felt that his whole person had been elevated. After the four of them finished polite communication with each other, Chu Xingmo turned his perspective and scanned the empty map, saying in confusion, "Are we the only four of us?" "No," Xiu said, "there are still two people in our guild who will go and see the situation first. We are just waiting for you here. And this time we're not going to kill monsters, we're going to grab monsters," Xiu said, and Chu Xingmo finally realized. The act of robbing monsters is not uncommon in honor. Unlike dungeon bosses, wild map bosses belong to whoever kills them. After playing in wild map for half a day, Chu Xingmo has seen this kind of thing in recent days when someone accidentally stabbed in and snatched them away. As for the guild, he has been busy practicing for the past few days and has not had time to pay attention to this matter. It was only at this moment that he noticed the words, Jia Dynasty, next to their nicknames when he heard Xiu say so. "You don't have a guild yet, do you?" Xiu spoke at this moment, "Do you want to join us?" Chu Xingmo hesitated for a moment before accepting Xiu's invitation to join the guild. After all, he was sure to play honor for a long time in the future, and adding a guild was also possible. Moreover, with Xiu and Su Muqiu being so strong, it would definitely be very beneficial for his future development. Jin Fugue unexpectedly declined the invitation from Xiu and the others. "Sorry, I have already established a guild with my friends. I'm sorry I can't join you," Jin Fugue said with regret. He was certainly aware of the benefits he could gain from being in the same guild with experts like Chu Xingmo, but he had already created a guild with his close friends that belonged to them. Although his strength was not very strong, it was a shared ownership among the two of them. Therefore, he had no choice but to refuse the invitation from Xiu and the others. Jin Fugue's rejection of their invitation did surprise Xiu, but as a seasoned honor player, he quickly understood the other party's thoughts. Although it may be difficult to gain strong support with friends, that kind of happiness is more important. It's okay, we can also team up together in the future. Xiu and Su Muqiu didn't have any gap due to Jin Fugue's refusal, but instead had a good impression of this guy who looked like a nouveau riche. I didn't see that this guy is still such a person who values emotions and righteousness. The four of them were chatting and had arrived at the dense forest of the Frost Forest. This was the instance refreshed by the Goblin Merchant, and the relatively sparse area in the outer circle was the leveling area. Along the way, Chu Xingmo did not see many people in the same direction as them. It seems that not many people knew about the boss's refreshing news at this point. Speaking of which, honor has just emerged. Although the number of players is not small, high-level players like Yi Xiu are still rare. Most people are still in a stage of self-entertainment, and conscious and organized behavior like theirs is currently difficult to see. Are you here? Entering the depths of the dense forest, there were two more people in the team channel. The 26th level elemental mage was merciless, and the 26th level sharpshooter, Zhangtian, appeared. Well, here we are, Yi Xiu said. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Huang K after. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Huang K after, how is the situation below? Yi Xiu manipulated Yi Zhiqiu to lie high on the ice wall, his gaze fixed on the battlefield below, and a few cautious people gathered around him. What's here is a domineering and majestic plan. Fabian gestured to the group of people who were besieging the goblin merchants. Chu Xingmo moved his perspective and indeed saw 5 players in the standing circle below, with the title of domineering and majestic figure on their heads, fiercely attacking the goblin merchant Lorraine. The figure at the forefront of the crowd caught Chu Xingmo's attention at this moment. Desert Solitary Smoke, Level 27 Fist Master. Just take a glance at the operation of this person, and Chu Xingmo can be certain that he is definitely a master. Ordinary players use ordinary punches in his hands with precision, as if they are directional strikes. The damage and speed are the highest level that Chu Xingmo has seen in recent days. Every time the goblin merchant wants to attack him, he will be avoided in time with his exquisite body movements, and his teammates will also come forward to supplement the output in time. The health of the goblin merchant has rapidly decreased to around 40% with the clever cooperation of 5 people. Oh, lonely smoke in the desert. Su Muqiu also noticed the outstanding martial artist in the audience, and his face immediately became playful. How do you say that? Chu Xingmo was stunned. From what he said, it seemed that the two sides didn't just know each other simply. It's okay, it's just an old opponent, Yi Xiu said with a smile. We have dealt with this guy many times, the competition between guilds, Su Muqiu said with a beaming expression, introducing their grudges and grievances to Chu Xingmo from beginning to end. Chu Xingmo only then understood the competition issue between the glory guilds. In order for a guild to grow, it must have sufficient resources to support its development. These resources can only be obtained by killing wild map bosses in addition to the daily cost savings of guild members. Therefore, major guilds often engage in fierce competition due to boss competition. Due to the existence of Yi Xiu and Su Muqiu, the Jia dynasty is now the most glorious guild. However, the domineering and powerful forces led by Desert Gaian are not weaker than those of the Jia dynasty. The two guilds often fight each other over resources. Alright, don't talk for now. While Su Muqiu and Chu Xingmo were talking, Yi Xiu, who was observing the situation below, suddenly spoke up. The boss is almost red blood. The two of them fixed their eyes and saw that under the attack of the domineering and majestic plan, the goblin merchant Lorraine's health was on the verge of 10%, and he was about to explode with red blood. I'll arrange it next, he said, looking at Chu Xingmo. Or don't you come? No, Chu Xingmo shook his head quickly. I'm not good at this. Over the past few days, he has been mostly solitary and rarely teamed up with others. He still lacks sufficient experience in commanding team operations. It is better to leave this matter to Yi Xiu, who is more knowledgeable in this field. The law cannot tolerate mercy. You are responsible for dividing the positions of the domineering and majestic map. Autumn Musu and Zhangtian, you two, wait for us to attract their attention and immediately hold on to the boss's hatred, Holy Sword Qianying and me. Yi Xiu looked at Chu Xingmo standing beside him and said calmly, "Take care of everyone in the domineering, majestic map." "Understood." Everyone immediately responded, and Chu Xingmo couldn't help but admire Yi Xiu's ability to come up with such an efficient and feasible combat plan in such a short time. "No, it should be a robbery plan, God, what about me?" Jin Fugue, who had been a transparent person for half a day, asked cautiously. Yi Xiu glanced at him and smiled humorously, "It's good to be alive." After he finished speaking, the few people present couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. Jin Fugue didn't feel any embarrassment at all. The few people present were indeed the worst at his level. Joining the battle rashly may not only be of no help, but may also become a burden for Chu Xingmo and others. If he insists on joining forcefully, he may be the first to be killed besides the boss. "Yes, I will definitely work hard to live," Jin Fugue said loudly. "Pwai." Upon hearing Jin Fugue's serious reply, even Chu Xingmo couldn't help but burst out laughing. "Okay, let's do it." Yi Xiu looked at the end of the standing circle and shouted in a deep voice. As the words fell, the characters of the few immediately lightning down from the ice wall, their targets pointing straight at the domineering and majestic figures in the field. Han Wenqing, who was operating the desert solitary smoke to evade attacks, suddenly heard a slightly panicked shout from his teammates beside him. "It's the Jia dynasty." The solitary smoke in the desert suddenly turned his perspective and indeed saw Yi Xiu and the others rushing towards him like eagles from the ice wall. "Autumn of one leaf." Han Wen snorted coldly, "Don't panic, first stabilize the output and kill Lorraine." Yes. It can be seen that Han Wenqing not only played a commanding role in this team, but his words were like a shot in the arm. Just now, there was a somewhat chaotic and domineering plan, and everyone immediately stabilized. They wanted to concentrate their firepower and forcefully kill Lorraine, who had only 10% life left. However, how could Yi Xiu make them achieve their wish? "Hee, I'm sorry." Fabu, who had already reached the back of the domineering and majestic team, gathered an icy blue light all over his body. "Could you please stop?" The power of elements combined with frost and snowballs, dozens of ice cones the size of one person emerged from the ground, strangling the orderly standing of the domineering and majestic team to pieces in an instant. Relying on the terrain of the frost forest, Fabian can unleash this control skill with a huge coverage area. Although it is only a low-level skill, it is already sufficient to isolate Han Wenqing and his team from outputting to the boss. Yi Xiu and others will certainly not miss this opportunity. Akimusu and Sangtian have already fired both guns, using the long-range of the sharpshooter to pull the boss out of the output range of the domineering and powerful map. "You guys." Of course, Su Muqiu and her actions did not escape Han Wenqing's sight. He knew in his heart that they might have to return empty-handed this time. Now that the boss has been taken away by the Jia dynasty, he must teach this troublemaker a good lesson in everything he says today. "Don't panic, everyone counterattack and take down the Jia dynasty on the spot." Han Wenqing ordered with full authority. Musu and Sangtian are going to kill the boss, so Yi Xiu and others only have 3 visible combat abilities. Although they have just finished fighting the boss and have suffered some losses, they are a well-organized team of 5. It's a bit naive for Yi Xiu to want to eat them with just 3 people. The solitary smoke in the desert swung its posture to face the Autumn of Yi, who was wielding his spear and plunging towards him. With a fierce and domineering punch, it charged straight towards the opposite side. But what Han Wenqing didn't expect was that Yi Xiu, who was fiercely killing, avoided this blow and used his fist as a fulcrum to fly over his head, directly entering the remaining 4 of the domineering, majestic figures. The spear flipped over, and the few who didn't react in the future chopped vegetables and melons in an instant. "Sorry, your opponent this time is not me," Yi Xiu smiled. "What?" While Han Wenqing was still in a daze, a lightning-fast sword light stabbed towards his chest. Rolling and dodging the sword, Han Wenqing suddenly looked up at the attacker standing in front of him. Holy Sword Qianying. Are you the new helper you found? Han Wenqing gave Yi Xiu a slanted glance and made a sarcastic tone. Hee hee. Yi Xiu smiled non-committally, his attacks incessantly, and the four powerful figures who had just regained their senses were in a state of embarrassment. Although these four were also considered good players, they were not inferior to top experts like Yi Xiu by more than 1.5 stars. Although they had an advantage in numbers, they were actually on a 7-point defense, and coupled with the relentless guerrilla harassment on the side, the scene was simply not too ugly. Xiao Jian doesn't need to talk nonsense to this guy, just hit him and shut up, Yi Xiu shouted. Stiletto Chu Xingmo's mouth twitched and he shook his head helplessly, which was a strange nickname. However, even if Yi Xiu didn't say anything, he wouldn't say much to the other party because they were not familiar, and Han Wenqing was obviously not a talkative person, so he definitely wouldn't come forward to talk to Chu Xingmo. Holy Sword Qianying and Desert Solitary Smoke have collided, facing Chu Xingmo's super high hand speed. Even with Han Wenqing's strength, they cannot take any advantage. The more he fought, the more frightened Han Wenqing became. He found that the opponent's attack was like a surging wave, with each wave stronger than the other. His own attack was always blocked by its just right block, but the opponent's moves were almost impenetrable, with each strike leaving piercing bloodstains on the Desert Solitary Smoke. Despite being at a disadvantage, Han Wenqing is still a top-notch expert, and of course, he would not be beaten to death by such a powerless opponent. Click. I saw lonely smoke in the desert making a crisp sound all over his body, and the whole character looked a bit tough. The level 15 skill of a martial artist, with steel tendons and iron bones, significantly enhances the character's physical defense while entering a dominant state. Faced with danger, Han Wenqing did not choose to back down. He wanted to forcefully disrupt the attack rhythm of the Holy Sword Qianying. Seeing the lone smoke rushing towards the desert like a fierce tiger in the jungle, the Holy Sword Qianying withdrew his sword and retreated. Just as everyone thought he was going to make a temporary concession, it took a long time, but Chu Xingmo made a response that made everyone present almost unable to believe his eyes. Everyone felt a blur in front of them, and in the next second, the figures of 5 holy swords and 1,000 shadows rushed forward, enveloping the solitary smoke of the desert. Alone, one can become 1,000 soldiers and horses. Swordsmen, of course, do not have such skills as clones. The reason for such a situation is that Chu Xingmo relied on his non-human hand speed and the illusion generated by the movement speed bonus when he activated the sprint state. In fact, only one of the 5 figures is a physical entity, and the rest are only remnants left by high-speed movement. Han Wenqing wanted to use his strength to break through cleverness, but faced with such a large number of shadows, he couldn't quickly distinguish which was the real entity. This once plunged Yi Xiu into a fierce battle, putting Han Wenqing in a dangerous situation. It should be noted that although Desert Lonely Smoke had high attack and thick blood, the martial artist did not have the control skills like the fallen flower palm of the battle mage in the early stage. Even if Han Wenqing could see Chu Xingmo's true body, he had no way to break the opponent's mysterious and unpredictable attack. Except for Yi Xiu and Su Muqiu, no one present could express their inner shock in words. "Oh my goodness!" exclaimed Fabian, whose personality was obviously more detached. "Yi, where did you find this person from? You're so fierce." Although the sky of the female character in the distance remained silent, the continuous rolling shock emoticons also highlighted her inner restlessness at this moment. Yi Xiu and Su Muqiu smiled at each other in front of the screen. After all, they had already witnessed Chu Xingmo using this body technique, and Yi Xiu was one of the witnesses. Of course, his performance would not be as awkward as the other two. It seems that he has improved again. Without losing his composure, Yi Xiu looked at the impenetrable shadow that enveloped the solitary smoke of the desert. He was also not very calm because he noticed that Chu Xingmo's hand speed had improved compared to when he had competed with him before, and it seemed that he had learned a lesson from his battle. The figure of the holy sword Qianying at this moment was even more erratic and elusive. I have a strong learning ability, Su Muqiu praised. At this moment, Han Wenqing, who was at the center of the attack, felt the most obvious feeling. Under the lightning-like attack of Chu Xingmo, the solitary smoke in the desert seemed to be in a jungle full of killing machines, surrounded by sword rain in all directions, with nowhere to hide and nowhere to find. Han Wenqing has heard of this technique before, but although it is theoretically feasible, it is not easy to cast this level of illusion in less than level 30. How precise the operation and how fast the hand speed are required. Who exactly is this person? At this moment, Yi Xiu was also pondering this question. It seemed that the tone of the other person's voice was still that of a local in H city. However, since the two had just met, it was not easy for Yi Xiu to directly go up and ask the other person, as that was quite repulsive. After pondering for a while, Yi Xiu shook his head and didn't think much anymore. His attack accelerated and he killed the 4 powerful figures in a burst of blood. In the distance, Su Muqiu and Sangtian were almost finished killing the goblin merchant. Under Chu Xingmo's command, Desert Solitary Smoke had only the ability to parry, and this snatching battle was undoubtedly their great victory. The holy sword, Thousand Shadows, turned sideways with a sword, and the lonely smoke in the desert had 0 health. Your team has completed the killing of goblin businessman Lorraine. At the same time, a system message popped up, and the remaining 4 members of the domineering and majestic figure were all turned into white light with the cooperation of Yi Ji Qiu and Fa Burong. Huh, it feels good, Chu Xingmo glanced at his soaring experience bar and chuckled lightly. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Accidents. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Accidents. Come to Xiaojian, see if there's anything you need. Yi Xiuchong waved to Chu Xingmo, who was standing not far away. Can we not call me Xiaojian? Chu Xingmo was helpless, and this title was just like adding someone to the back. I'm sorry. Yi Xiu scratched his head awkwardly, probably feeling that this title was a bit unconventional. But I don't know how you call it yet. Chu Xingmo. As for online games, knowing the name doesn't matter. Anyway, he doesn't want the other party to be called by Xiaojian again. Then I'll call you Xingmo, my name is Yi Qiu. After thinking for a moment, Yi Qiu enthusiastically introduced to Chu Xingmo, this is Su Muqiu, and there's also the elemental mage Qin Tianran. Qin Tianran waved his hand warmly to him, and Su Muqiu was fully immersed in the pile of materials dropped by the goblin merchant at this moment. He greeted him without looking up, and there was no further conversation. Chu Xingmo didn't mind this either. He turned his head and looked at the heavens who seemed to have never spoken from beginning to end. And this one? Just call her Xiaoming. Yi Qiu's tone was a bit strange. Sangtian didn't speak but typed hello in the chat box, with a smiling emoji behind it. Chu Xingmo looked at the sky that was completely out of place with the other male characters around him, nodded thoughtfully, and then leaned closer to Yi Jiqiu in a low voice, asking, girl. Yi Qiu also looked embarrassed and whispered, I don't know, do you also know about online games? It's normal for a big man to choose a female character image, this. There is a saying online that goes. Online games do not have voice commands, typing comes with emoticons, it's either a fake girl or a younger sister. Does this heaven belong to the former? When Chu Xingmo thought that behind such a heroic character could be a fake housewife, he couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over his body. I can hear it. The 2 people who were whispering froze as if stepping on the switch. When they regained their senses, they saw the protagonist of the discussion staring at them with a gloomy expression on his face. The 2 quickly started laughing and scattered around. I'll go, finally there's this thing. Su Muqiu, who was squatting there, suddenly shouted. What's going on? What's going on? Several people were startled by the sudden commotion he made and rushed forward. Autumn Musu held a crystal-clear ice blue crystal in her hand and muttered with an infatuated gaze, "Ice crystal. Ice edge crystal, a high-level fusion material with ice properties, is not particularly outstanding, but it is extremely difficult to obtain. The only way to obtain it is to kill the goblin merchant Lorraine with only a 2% chance of success. With this, I'm one step closer to being evil." Su Muqiu patted Yi Xiu's shoulder, excited beyond control. All right, I know," Yi Xiu said helplessly, patting the guy next to him who had jumped off to signal him to restrain himself. There were still so many people around. "All the materials I need are ready, you can choose the rest yourself." Su Muqiu pushed the dropped materials to everyone. Qin Tianran and Xia Ming selected a few materials they each needed. Chu Xingmo glanced at the items on the list and didn't have what he needed now, so he gave up. The equipment on his body was enough to adapt to his current level, and the weapon Wind Thunder was still exchanged for orange martial arts through arena points. The equipment was not very scarce, so let's talk about it later. The most surprising thing was his wealth. The materials dropped by the goblin merchant Lauren were nothing to him, but the equipment revealed by Yi Xiu and others after the death of the domineering and powerful figures only selected a few that were needed, and the rest was given to him. According to Yi Xiu's words, "We can't let them run on empty trips. It's really a robbery that blocks the way." Jin Fugue was overjoyed as he looked at the extra equipment in his backpack. He was so excited that he almost fainted on the spot. The things that Yi Xiu and others didn't like were all treasures to him, and many of them were difficult to obtain even with money. This made Jin Fugue extremely happy. He didn't expect his investment in Chu Xingmo to return so quickly, and he was so excited that he almost wanted to hug him and kiss him. This boy who came out of nowhere is really his lucky star. Yi Xiu handed over the remaining materials to the guild warehouse and led everyone to evacuate from the frost forest to the next leveling area. He thought to himself if he could try his luck again, but he didn't know if it was due to that ice crystal. After a morning, everyone had not encountered any new wild map bosses, but their levels gradually improved. Iye Jiqiu and Kiyomasu were close to the level 30 level. The level of the holy sword Qianying has reached level 29. Chu Xingmo looked at the time and it was already around February 30th, noon. Thinking of going to buy clothes and tidy up himself, he said hello to Yi Xiu and the others before going offline. At this moment, Jin Fugue was still immersed in the previous unexpected joy, tirelessly following Yi Xiu and the others around as if he were a little brother. Not to mention that this guy did such a thing without any sense of discord. Coincidentally, Tao Xian was at the internet cafe at the moment. Chu Xingmo brought up his idea of coming to Jiashi Internet Cafe for 2 months, and the other party happily agreed, letting him rest assured to continue working here. By the way, Xingmo, are you playing Honor? Tao Xian, sitting at the bar, looked up from the screen and asked. Upon seeing Chu Xingmo nod and agree, Tao Xian immediately exclaimed excitedly, "I happen to have 2 young people of your age who are also playing Honor. Should I introduce them to you?" "No, brother Xian." Chu Xingmo glanced at the time, "I have something else to do. Let's wait until I go to work tonight." "Okay, anyway, you're going to become colleagues soon," Tao Xian said. Yi Qiu, who had taken a break halfway after Chu Xingmo left, walked over and couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong, brother Xian? Are you so happy today? Did you win the lottery?" Go ahead. Tao Xian gave him a displeased glance. "Dig up an excellent young man and he will soon become your colleague." Tao Xian invited Chu Xingmo to work as an internet administrator at Jiashi Internet Cafe, not only for the sake of helping the latter, but also for Chu Xingmo's outstanding personal abilities. A few days ago, Chu Xingmo's outstanding performance in online job applications was appreciated by Tao Xian, and the other party happened to have such needs. Of course, he didn't mind making a favor for Chu Xingmo, so both sides took what they needed. "Oh, is that what's going on?" Yi Xiu smiled. Then I really want to see the nice young man you mentioned, Brother Xian. I just went out. I'll introduce you and Muqiu when you're on night shift at night. I casually bought myself 2 tops and jackets in the clothing market, and Chu Xingmo went to a hair salon by the way. After spending so many days at the Jiashi internet cafe, he didn't even wash his head much. His previously smooth and greasy hair was almost knotted, so he decided to cut it short. Looking at himself, who looked much more neat in the mirror, Chu Xingmo nodded in satisfaction and then went to the bathhouse to take a good shower. He practiced day and night in the internet cafe, and the smell on his body was a bit unpleasant. After tossing and turning this afternoon, Chu Xingmo felt refreshed all over. Coupled with the newly purchased coat, his overall appearance improved significantly. Walking on the street with a beautiful and sunny appearance also increased his chances of turning heads. It's time to go back. Standing behind the zebra crossing, waiting for the traffic lights, Chu Xingmo looked at the bustling metropolis in front of him. At this time, it was almost evening, and the colorful lights reflected a dreamlike brilliance in his eyes. After coming to H City for so long, this is the first time he has had time to go out and explore. A few days ago, he was exhausted by work and his life has finally settled down. Although he works as a network administrator, at least he has a stable source of income, and things will always find their way in the future. Chu Xingmo was full of confidence in the future, and at that moment, a little girl wearing a white long dress stood beside her. This is a very beautiful girl, probably just starting her first year of junior high school. She wears a snow-white long dress that is spotless, embroidered with a few pink butterflies on the cuffs and hem of her clothes, and her orange long hair at the waist flutters with the breeze. Her delicate little head is tied with a light pink bow, and her white socks are paired with a pair of brown leather shoes, making her look agile and beautiful. Looking at her backpack on her back, it should be just after school, Chu Xingmo thought to himself. Unconsciously, he recalled the scene when he went to junior high school and felt a sigh in his heart. While Chu Xingmo was still shaking his mind, the pedestrian traffic lights had turned green. The little girl walked lightly across the street with her backpack on her back. Chu Xingmo regained consciousness and was about to take a step when a white car suddenly seemed to lose control and rush towards them in the distance. Danger! Chu Xingmo shouted. The little girl standing in the center of the zebra crossing seemed to be scared and dumbfounded, completely stunned. Amidst the screams of the surrounding crowd, as the car was about to collide with the little girl, a figure suddenly ran rapidly from the zebra crossing and held the little girl tightly in its arms. Chu Xingmo held the frightened little girl in his arms and welcomed the speeding car with his back. At this moment, he could only hope that Chen Huayang's devil training from a young age could come in handy. Bang! In front of him, everything was spinning around, and Chu Xingmo felt that his ribs had been broken. He thought too simply, using his flesh and blood to fight against the weight of 1.5 tons of steel. Even though his physical fitness far exceeded that of an ordinary person, he was knocked nearly 10 meters away and his head was heavily hit on the curb. "Big brother, are you okay?" Crying seemed to come and go in his ears, and Chu Xingmo opened his eyes in a daze. In front of him was the pretty face of the little girl crying, with tears streaming down her face. The voices of the surrounding crowd shouting from far to near rang out. "As long as you're okay," Chu Xingmo smiled weakly, his eyelids sinking deeper and the world slowly plunged into pitch black. "What did you say?" Su Muqiu, sitting in the seat, suddenly bounced up, ignoring the inexplicable gazes of others, with a frightened and uneasy expression on her face. "What's going on?" Yi Qiu stopped her operation and frowned. Su Muqiu put down his phone in a daze and said, "Muqiu has an accident." The next second, he ran out frantically. "Hey, wait for me." Yi Qiu quickly put down her earphones and chased after her. The two of them took a taxi to the central hospital. As soon as they reached the second floor, Su Muqiu saw Su Muqiu sitting on a bench at the entrance of the ward. The latter's arm was wrapped in a layer of white bandage and his face was stained with blood. Quickly running to her sister's side, Su Muqiu anxiously shook her shoulder and said, "Mucheng, are you okay? How are you injured? Show it to my brother." Su Muqiu almost fell off the seat when he shook him, and Yi Qiu behind him couldn't bear his reckless behavior. He gave him a hard blow on the head. "I said you should calm down, okay? Didn't you see Muqing sitting here properly? This is the hospital, why are you in such a hurry?" "Someone saved me," Su Muqing whispered, telling Yi Qiu and the others the cause and effect of the situation. When Su Muqiu heard that her sister was almost hit by a car while crossing the road, she was so scared that she almost couldn't take her breath back. It wasn't until she heard a young man rescue her from the car that she breathed a big sigh of relief. "Muqing, who saved you? Where is now?" Compared to Su Muqiu's concern, Yi Qiu keenly caught the key point in Su Muqing's words. Su Muqing pointed to the ward behind her, and at that moment, the doctor in a white coat pushed the door open and walked out. "Who is the patient's family member?" We are his friends," said Yi Qiu as he vaguely kicked Su Muqiu, who was standing up beside him. "Although I don't know who the other person is, they were injured to save their precious sister." Of course, Su Muqiu couldn't be indifferent to everything. "Come on, sign here." Yi Qiu took the order handed by the doctor, glanced up and down, and his gaze suddenly froze on the top line of the document. Chu Xingmo, male, 17 years old. At this moment, Su Muqiu had also seen the name, and the two of them looked at each other in disbelief, their hearts filled with disbelief. "No, it's just a coincidence, isn't it?" End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu. Seeing the figure lying on the hospital bed with a bandage wrapped around his head, Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu were both surprised. They didn't expect the young man who had been on their minds for so long to be so beautiful, and his bravery in rescuing Su Muqing shocked them even more. Perhaps the word heartfelt longing sounds a bit strange to use, but Yi Qiu really wants to see the boy who has shocked him a lot. "Doctor, how is his condition?" Tao Xian, who had received news from Yi Qiu, asked at this moment. Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu arrived too hastily, neither of them carrying much money. In order to avoid embarrassment, Yi Qiu had to call Tao Xian, who was still in the internet cafe. Unexpectedly, when the latter heard that the person in the accident was Chu Xingmo, he rushed over without further ado. "Don't worry, he's not a big deal." The doctor's tone was also shocked. "His physical condition is the best I have ever seen in my more than 10 years as a doctor. He was hit on the back of his body, causing only minor closed fractures and abrasions to his back and arms. He also suffered minor head injuries from hitting his head on the steps, and everything else was fine. I have carefully examined and bandaged him, and he will rest well when he returns." Although it may seem unbelievable, there are numerous signs that this young man's physical fitness is definitely far beyond that of an ordinary person. His strength, endurance, agility, and flexibility are almost twice that of an ordinary person. If it weren't for this, he would have suffered a crushing fracture at the slightest. This doctor with rich medical experience almost wanted to bring Chu Xingmo directly into the examination room for a thorough examination before. Although I didn't quite understand the professional terminology the doctor was using, I heard that Chu Xingmo was not a big deal, and all three people present breathed a sigh of relief. "This kid is really lucky," Su Muqiu looked at Chu Xingmo, who was sleeping heavily in bed, and said half-jokingly and happily. Yi Qiu and Tao Xian also shared a deep sense of curiosity and were surprised by Chu Xingmo's inhumane system. Yi Qiu now understood why Chu Xingmo, who had just come into contact with honor, was able to perform such a difficult operation. "This guy is not an ordinary person at all. All right, come with me and pay the fees," the doctor said, picked up the medical flat, pushed the door open, and walked out. "Yi Qiu, go pay the money. There's something else at the internet cafe, so I'll go back first." Tao Xian took out a few hundred yuan bills from his wallet and handed them to Yi Qiu. Now that it's confirmed that Chu Xingmo is okay, he can finally go back with peace of mind. Brother Xian, I'll give you a ride. Yi Qiu went to pay the fee, and of course Su Muqiu had to give the other person a ride. After all, if it weren't for Tao Xian, he and Yi Qiu might have had to be embarrassed in the hospital for a while today. Thank you very much for what happened today. It's okay, Tao Xian waved his hand indifferently. You don't need to worry about this small matter. We can all be considered a family. A family. Su Muqiu was taken aback. He and Yi Qiu worked as network administrators at the Jiashi Internet Cafe, and were considered part of the same family as Tao Xian, right? But Chu Xingmo. Oh, I haven't had a chance to tell you about this yet. Seeing Su Muqiu's puzzled expression, Tao Xian reacted, Xingmo is a new employee I recruited these days. He has been staying at the internet cafe for the past few days, and you and Yi Qiu were on vacation a few days ago, so we didn't see him. We were originally planning to introduce you tonight, but unexpectedly, something like this happened suddenly. So it's like this. Knowing the whole story, Su Muqiu couldn't help but laugh or cry. The expert who had been pondering for a long time with him and Yi Qiu turned out to be by their side, and the other party coincidentally saved Su Muqiu. The word fate is truly amazing. Brother. Seeing the two of them come out, Su Muqiu, who was sitting on the bench waiting, stood up and looked anxiously at Su Muqiu. Don't worry, he's okay. Su Muqiu crouched down and rubbed his sister's little head, comforting her softly. That's good, Su Muqiu clearly breathed a sigh of relief. I'll see Xian off first, you go in and take a look. Su Muqiu patted her sister's shoulder and walked with Tao Xian towards the hospital gate. After Xingmo woke up, he told him that there was no need to rush to work. It was important to take good care of his body first. The voices of the two gradually faded away, and Su Muqiu gently pushed open the door and quietly walked into the ward. Pulling a chair and sitting down in front of the hospital bed, Su Muqiu fixed her hands on the edge of the bed, gazing fixedly at Chu Xingmo's sleeping face, her mind full of thoughts. At the moment when she was about to be hit by a car, she was really scared, her legs stiff as if she had lost consciousness, and she was stunned and could only watch the uncontrollable car driving towards her. When being held in Chu Xingmo's arms, she felt safer than ever before, feeling the warm body temperature in the other person's arms. Her panicked mind gradually calmed down, although she didn't know why, she believed she was safe. After soaring into the air, he was unharmed, only slightly scratched, but the person who sacrificed his life to save him is now lying on the hospital bed, with a thick bandage wrapped around his forehead. Remembering the scene where the other person was covered in blood and carried by the doctor to the ambulance, Su Muqiu felt her heart ache fiercely. It's really great to know now that he won't be okay, Su Muqiu thought to herself as her tense nerves gradually relaxed and she lay by the bed, slowly falling asleep. Chu Xingmo, who was deeply asleep, recalled the events that happened when he was a child in his sleep. On the evening of his 10th birthday, his master took him up the mountain to see the stars, but due to the weather, the two of them did not see a single star when they reached the mountaintop, only thick dark clouds covering the night sky. Chu Xingmo sat on the ground dejected, his mouth flattened in grievance. Master is deceiving people, there are no stars at all. Chen Huang saw his disappointed expression and leaned down beside him, sitting down with a smile and saying, Xiao, do you know why your mother named you Xingmo? Why? Chu Xingmo raised his head. The master caressed his little head and said kindly, because she hopes that one day, you will be like the stars in the sky, even if you are not seen, you can still shine with your own brightness. But what's the point of flickering alone without being seen? Chu Xingmo said with disappointment, that's not very lonely. Silly child. Chen Huang lightly stroked his beard and shook his head with a smile. The twinkling of stars is not just for himself, but to embellish this sky. Dark clouds cannot permanently obscure starlight. Chu Xingmo looked up and saw that the dark clouds in the sky had dissipated at some point. Little by little, faint starlight shone in the night sky, and 3 or 2 stars together shimmered brightly. Wow! Chu Xingmo stood up in surprise, his gaze fixed on the sparkling night sky, with a glint of infatuation in his eyes. Searching for him thousands of times in the crowd, suddenly looking back, that person was in the dimly lit area. Chen Huayang's voice came from behind. Xiao, you will understand in the future that one day you will meet someone who shares the same aspirations as you, and you will become friends. At that time, you will no longer be lonely. Chen Huayang stood beside him, his tone full of profound meaning. You will also encounter someone who belongs to you, and at that moment, you will feel that owning her is like owning the whole world. Chu Xingmo nodded with a vague understanding. At the age of only 10, he still couldn't understand the profound meaning in Chen Huayang's words, but he still remembered his master's words deeply and did not realize them. He worked hard to yearn for the future. Master, Chu Xingmo, lying in bed, opened his eyes and murmured absent-mindedly. At first glance, it was a completely unfamiliar ceiling, but with the smell of disinfectant coming from his nose, Chu Xingmo quickly realized where he was now. Struggling to sit up, Chu Xing immediately felt the pain from his back and his head was as heavy as pouring lead. Am I in the hospital? Chu Xingmo stared blankly at his bandaged arms. I'm still alive. At the moment when his body rushed out, he was actually mentally prepared to lose his life, but he didn't expect that the heavens would let him survive, and he didn't suffer any serious injuries from this. In his mind, he immediately recalled the hellish training Chen Huayang had given him since childhood, and a faint smile slowly appeared at the corner of Chu Xingmo's mouth. Thank you, Master. Chu Xingmo looked at the environment of the ward and suddenly noticed Su Muqiu sleeping soundly by the bed. He recognized at a glance that the other party was the little girl he had been protecting with his own body. It looks like she shouldn't have been injured. Although he was somewhat puzzled as to why the other party was in his own ward, seeing that Su Muqiu had no scars on his body, Chu Xingmo let go and his gaze was particularly gentle. I noticed that the bow tied on the other person's head was a bit crooked. Chu Xingmo gently reached out to straighten it, but I don't know if it was because he had just been injured and his body was weak. His extended palm accidentally touched the other person's delicate little head. Upon being touched by him, Su Muqiu, who was already not asleep, looked up with sleepy eyes. When she saw Chu Xingmo sitting there with an awkward expression on her face, her expression instantly became clear and she stared at the other person in a daze. Oh no, I won't be mistaken for a pervert, will I? Chu Xingmo felt embarrassed in his heart. Just as he was about to explain, he was shocked to see a soft and delicate body fiercely bump into his arms. Woo-woo, that's great. Big brother, you finally woke up. Su Muqiu hugged Chu Xingmo's neck, burying her small face at the other person's collar and wailing loudly. Chu Xingmo is in such pain. His back is not yet sharp, and Su Muqiu's pressure almost made him cry out in pain. What's even worse is that the latter's cold tears almost dripped down his collar into the hospital uniform, and the chilly feeling was simply not too sour. The gentle and delicate body of the girl in his arms pressed against him, making him afraid to move even. His hands were awkwardly suspended in mid-air, wanting to remind him, but he didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the girl in her arms soon realized that he was still injured and quickly got off him. She rubbed her crying red eyes and said weakly, I'm sorry, I'm too anxious. Are you okay? It's okay. Chu Xingmo smiled bitterly and shook his head. Although his back still hurt a bit, he saw the other person crying because he was worried about himself. Can he still say a word of criticism? Su Muqiu stole a glance at Chu Xingmo, thinking of her recent impulsive behavior. Her fair face slowly turned red, and she stood there unsure of what to say. Chu Xingmo was not good at dealing with girls, and she didn't know how to speak at this moment. The two of them stared at each other without saying anything, and the atmosphere in the ward suddenly became strange. Muching, what's going on? Fortunately, the atmosphere in the ward didn't last long. After paying the treatment fee, Yi Qiu pushed open the door and walked in. She keenly noticed that the atmosphere in the ward was a bit eerie, but didn't think much. Seeing Chu Xingmo sitting there unscathed, her face suddenly burst with joy. Xingmo, are you awake? Chu Xingmo looked up and down at the young man in front of him, who was about his age, and confirmed that he had never met him before. He asked in confusion, do we know each other? First time we met, I'm Yi Qiu. Yi Qiu nodded with a smile. Yi Qiu. Chu Xingmo was stunned. Before he could ask, he saw another boy with orange hair enter the hospital room. Seeing the expression on his face, he immediately became excited and said, "Wow, you finally woke up. Thank you for saving my sister this time." Seeing Chu Xingmo's inexplicable expression, Su Muqiu smiled in silence and said, "I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Su Muqiu." Su Muqiu. Chu Xingmo was truly shocked and didn't know what to say. His gaze scanned the two of them back and forth, and his astonishment was beyond words. Leaf Autumn, the autumn of one leaf, Su Muqiu, Autumn Musu, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. Family Members. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Family Members. That's how it happened. Chu Xing sat silently on the bed and told the two police officers who came to investigate the case the whole process of what happened that day. Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu's siblings stayed on either side of him, their faces couldn't help but laugh. "Okay, thank you for your cooperation." The handsome female police officer closed her notebook and looked up at Chu Xingmo, her delicate eyebrows slightly furrowed. "However, Chu, I think it's necessary to remind you that although your behavior is admirable and commendable, please think twice before taking action next time such a thing happens. After all, everyone's life is precious, and don't let yourself get involved in it if you don't save anyone. This is a bit excessive." Yi Qiu and Su Muqiu couldn't help but frown slightly, and Su Muqiu, sitting next to Chu Xingmo, angrily glared at each other. What did this woman say? It was like criticizing brother Xingmo, and Su Muqiu felt very angry. "Hey Xiaohan, you're going too far in saying that." The middle-aged man sitting next to the policewoman quickly came out to make amends. "After all, Chu is trying to save people, so we should not undermine their enthusiasm for doing good." After speaking, he turned his gaze to Chu Xingmo and stood up sincerely, saying, "Hello Chu, you are recovering well. We won't disturb you. We will deliver your banner later." "Thank you, Officer Xiang." Chu Xingmo nodded and then looked at the indifferent female police officer, speaking calmly. "At the same time, I am very grateful for your reminder, Officer Han. However, if such a thing happens again next time, I think I will still do it because I cannot ignore the passing of life in front of me." Humph. Upon hearing Chu Xingmo's plain words, the cold police officer snorted coldly in anger and immediately stood up without looking back. Officer Xiang next to her, feeling embarrassed, bowed his head to apologize to Chu Xingmo and the others, and left with the door closed. "Brother Xingmo, don't pay attention to that woman. I think she deliberately caused trouble for you." Su Muqiu leaned over to Chu Xingmo and angrily defended him. "Don't say that, Muqiu." Chu Xingmo shook his head slightly. "After all, they are doing it for our good, let alone what Officer Han just said is actually unreasonable." But, Su Muqiu wanted to argue further, and Chu Xingmo smiled and rubbed her little head. "Don't worry, okay?" "Oh." Seeing this, Su Muqiu could only nod silently. "Hey, I said Xingmo." Su Muqiu, who was leaning against the window, spoke at this moment. "Which policewoman might not be interested in you, that's why she's so worried about your safety. If you don't speak, no one will consider you mute," Chu Xingmo said silently. After Su Muqiu truly got to know each other, he felt even more disconnected than on the internet. His words were quite out of tune, and he couldn't help but be infuriated by Ma Xingkong's words that day. Sitting there peeling oranges, Su Muqiu turned around and glared fiercely at her brother, pretending to be angry and looking very pleasing. "All right, stop making a fuss." Xiu then spoke up to persuade the three playful people in the field. "Xingmo, how is your injury recovering?" "Not bad." Chu Xingmo lay back in bed exhausted both physically and mentally. At least he hasn't been tossed to death yet. Looking back on the past few days, it was like a dream. First, by chance, I met Xiu and the others, and then the police came to inquire about what had happened that day. The female driver on the road that day was a novice and mistakenly used the accelerator as the brake, which almost caused such a dangerous situation. After learning about the situation, Chu Xingmo did not intend to hold the other party criminally responsible. Eventually, both parties chose to go private, so the police only imposed administrative penalties and a 3-day criminal detention, as well as bearing all the treatment costs during Chu Xingmo's hospitalization. I didn't expect the other party to come to the hospital without stopping to thank Chu Xingmo. They bought a lot of flowers and fruit baskets, and the words of gratitude almost made Chu Xingmo's ears calluses. However, the other party's behavior is not difficult to understand. If it weren't for Chu Xingmo stepping forward to save Su Muqiu that day, and if the person lying under the car at that time was Su Muqiu, then the handling of the matter would definitely not have been so simple. Then came the on-site interviews with reporters and newspapers. Chu Xingmo's incident happened to coincide with the H-City's campaign to establish a positive image of a citizen. He then made headlines on the front pages of major newspapers in H-City. His brave and righteous actions were even displayed on the rolling screens of the H-City government in the city center for 3 consecutive days, causing him to spend almost all these days dealing with reporters. If it weren't for Xiu and others to help him block unnecessary interviews in a timely manner, his injuries would probably have worsened a bit. "Brother Xingmo, eat oranges." Su Muqiu brought the peeled oranges to Chu Xingmo and looked at him with a smile. "Thank you." Chu Xingmo smiled and took it, then sighed with a pretentious expression, "It's better to be Muqiu, unlike some people." "Hey, what do you mean?" Some of the people named immediately approached angrily. "It was my sister who peeled an orange for you. Shouldn't you thank my brother by the way?" Bark and bustle. Chu Xingmo was eating the peeled oranges of Su Muqiu one by one, without even looking at him, which made Su Muqiu very angry. "Sister, shouldn't you peel one for my older brother? For the sake of my hard work these days." Su Muqiu looked eagerly at Su Muqiu. Su Muqiu just gave him a sideways glance before throwing the complete orange into the other person's arms. "You have hands and feet, peel it yourself," he said. "I'll go, I'm your own brother." Su Muqiu complained bitterly, "Besides, isn't this guy also?" "Brother Xingmo is injured," Su Muqiu said confidently. Su Muqiu was blocked for a long time by her sister's elbow turning outward, and her eyes drifted towards Xiu, who was sneering to the side. "Xiu, I knew you were the best to me. Stop it." Xiu raised his hand to block the guy's face as he pounced and couldn't help but laugh. "Don't expect me to peel it for you. You can do it yourself, don't you know?" The indoor atmosphere fell silent for 3 seconds, and Su Muqiu looked up sorrowfully. "You inhumane guy." Then he looked at Chu Xingmo, who was sitting there pretending to be ignorant, with a gloomy expression as if the other party owed him hundreds of yuan but hadn't paid him back. "It's so unfair, why wasn't I hurt?" Chu Xingmo and the 3 of them ignored this actor and acted on their own. At this moment, as the sunset set in the west, the dim yellow sun shone into the room and draped a thin layer of feather gauze over the 4 people inside. Chu Xingmo quietly watched the scene before him, feeling warm in his heart. This feeling, like a family, he had not experienced for a long time. Su Muqiu was still rolling around there, while Xiu sat in the seat helplessly watching this guy. Su Muqiu couldn't help but cover his lips and chuckle because of his brother's immaturity. However, no matter what, the faces of the 3 of them were so vivid and warm in his eyes. The scene before him would constantly remind him of and deeply recall it for many years to come. By the way, have you completed the discharge procedures for me, Yi Qiu? Chu Xingmo asked as he stood up. Well, it's already done. Yi Qiu nodded hesitantly, but Xingmo, are you really sure your body doesn't need to be hospitalized for observation for another 2 days? Don't worry, Chu Xingmo said without looking back as he put on his shirt. I know my body well and there are no problems at all. Thanks to Chen Huayang's devilish training since childhood, Chu Xingmo's body has fully recovered after these days of recuperation, which has shocked many doctors in the hospital. I don't want to stay in the hospital anymore, it's unbearable. Chu Xingmo put on his clothes and turned around with a bitter smile. Where do you live now, brother Xingmo? Su Muqiu, who was shy and ran out of the door after changing clothes, leaned out and asked him in confusion. Upon hearing this, Chu Xing hesitated for a moment and remembered the question he had been ignoring these days. Where did he live? Living in Jiashi Internet Cafe all the time is obviously not a problem. Changing clothes and other things are very inconvenient, but if he wants to rent a house outside on his own, with his savings, it doesn't seem very abundant to want to rent a house in H City. Yi Qiu saw his difficulties and immediately smiled, saying, why don't you move in with me and Mu Qiu and the others? As soon as these words were spoken, all 3 people present were taken aback. Su Muqiu quickly regained consciousness and clapped his hands, saying, all right. If brother Xingmo also moved in, the house would be even more lively. No, I object. While Chu Xingmo was still hesitating, Su Muqiu beside him had already spoken up first, at least it's my house. Shouldn't you ask for the opinion of my head of household? The opposition is invalid. Yi Qiu smiled and looked at Su Muqiu. Now it's 2.1, with 2 votes passed, isn't it Muqiu? That's right. The 2 of them exchanged a glance and ignored Su Muqiu standing there. You guys. Su Muqiu looked at his friend and sister incredulously, feeling his heart breaking. He didn't expect these 2 people to abandon him so quickly and change their family. Okay, I agree. At this point, what else can he say? Even if he doesn't agree, he must agree, otherwise he might end up in trouble. In that case, I won't be polite. Chu Xingmo smiled gratefully without any further courtesy. Yi Qiu's suggestion was indeed the best way at the moment, as it could save money and provide mutual support among the 4 people. At this moment, Su Muqiu hooked onto Chu Xingmo's neck and said fiercely, I'm warning you, kid. You can stay at my house. If you dare to have any crooked ideas about my sister, I'll twist your head off. As she said, her left hand swept over her neck, staring at the latter with a gloomy expression. You can have 100 hearts, I'm not as dirty as you think. Chu Xingmo smiled nonchalantly, ignoring his non-threatening posture. What, you guy? What's wrong with your attitude? Stop playing around, you two. It should be dark soon. Brother is so childish. Muqiu, you despise me again. Woo, why am I so unlucky? 4 people walked out of the hospital together, and the bright moon quietly rose in the night sky. The moonlight reflected the figures of several people playing and frolicking with each other, accompanied by the gentle breeze at night, appearing peaceful and distant. It's really tiring to finish writing this chapter. End of this chapter.